Ah, shit, I had my mic muted. Hate when that happens. What's up, everyone? Welcome to Brap. It's Friday, January. Shit, I mean, February 21st. Got some, I kind of maybe not, I guess slower news cycle, but maybe not because Shuei Yoshida has been making the rounds post retirement from PlayStation. So we'll talk about that here in a little bit. Also, please do me a favor, hit that like button, do the whole YouTube thing, subscribe. You know what to do. Yeah, Shuei gives some really interesting insight into all things PlayStation. Actually got to play Naughty Dog's online game that was ultimately canceled. And then a great interview with Matt Piscatella on Kind of Funny. Matt gave a lot of insight into the gaming industry, certain trends, things, Doomsayer, that people need to fucking pay attention to, because we've been saying this shit for months and years and months. And it's just like, I always say the pundits, we were talking about a certain podcast. Look, people, just because you think something makes sense doesn't mean it makes sense. And instead of just saying, oh, yeah, like, they should do day to date because, it makes sense. Like, do your fucking homework. We have this thing called Google.
Brap, I could tell you what, Nate, that's in the chat, he could tell you all about what was on that show earlier today because he was sitting there arguing with them.
Like, I don't understand. Look, just listen to the Shuei interview, okay? And look at Xbox. Look at the reason Shuei actually gives us some insight into the challenges of making first-party games, okay? Making first-party games, and what happens if your hardware it consumes a very small segment of the market share, meaning like you're in last place, right? He said that one of his biggest fears was, shit, if we are the minority platform, that's going to make it very difficult for us to make first party games. It's going to be very difficult for us to attract, to retain development talent, because he's like, look, developers love making video games, but they're also business people too. They want to make money, and inherently they want to get their games on in front of as many people as possible. And if you can't do that first party, you have a problem. The people should just kind of just like digest those things that people in the industry who actually work in the industry are saying to you. Like the information, the data is there, everything is there. I don't understand. Frankly, Doomsday, I don't understand where the mix-up is.
Well, you just sat there and said the data is right in front of them. I've heard people, whether it was on Twitter or other little clips in that, it's like Sony is in trouble. Sony's this, Sony's that, and whatever else. But then all of a sudden, the reports come out, and David was even sitting there saying 9.5 million consoles sold in a quarter. 40% was new users. And then he was sitting there saying about the MOUs, and you and Logic talk about it a lot, the ARPU. I mean, that 22% up in the quarter in that, I'm not understanding why they're in trouble. And then if they sit there, and I've heard, oh, well, Sony doesn't have a roadmap. Sony doesn't have games. Sony doesn't have this. If you actually go back and just like you sat there and said, you Google it, I think it was like 2.3 games every year is what Sony gives you from their first party. So it's not like they're giving you, 10 games a year or something like that. They've been consistent in everything. And then Shuhei saying, about making money, they're bringing older games out. Sure, they're going to make money. It doesn't, take that much, I would think, to port games over. It's their older games, and whatever they can make off of it, I mean, go for it,
Yeah, I just, it's every week there's just some dumb conversation around, and we had it in the live, not the live chat, we had it in the comment section after last week's show, where it's the same thing. Somebody was saying, was making up numbers that just didn't exist. They were talking about Xbox being profitable. I mean, that division doesn't report profitability. And so look, I mean, let me get Falky in here real quick. Falky, how are you today, sir?
I'm doing quite well. Apologies for my tardiness.
Oh no, it's okay, Falky. It is. We're just talking about some of the. I guess you were listening to this particular show where they were. Falky's smile just says it all. He's like, yeah, I. Unfortunately, it sounds like you had to listen to this.
David, can I say something before you start?
You can.
David,
You can.
I feel so horrible for David because he's in a chat, and the people that are in that chat, it's just like, man, you just shake your head. You just literally shake your head. I'm sorry, David.
No, that's all right. That's all right. It was an interesting conversation. Yeah. The way that the mind works for some is quite a puzzling, but at times intriguing window to look through. We'll put it that way. But having said that, some people have their perspectives and their opinions, and it's based off their experiences and the information they have at hand. But geez, they really do need to do some basic reading on some stuff. All the power at our fingertips with Google, and still people just say really stupid shit. And the Twitter post that post that I put up the last 3 days probably gives you a bit of a running idea of where it started to where it's landed with my my little caption yesterday with my beautiful picture. But yeah, I just some people, fair enough, they want to have their opinion. They feel they want to share their opinion, and others share their opinion as well. They agree on it, but one opinion does not the truth make. So, and I suppose likewise, I offer my opinion on certain things. I get asked my professional opinion on, or my knowledge based opinion on certain things, same as everyone else on here does. And we provide that knowledge and interpretation, but that's based off years of experience, years of getting paid day in, day out to do these jobs, and having gone and studied this stuff in detail and know how to find the information and then interpret the information. And just because someone doesn't like it and they then turn around and go, oh, you're just an idiot, or I don't believe you, you're making it up, you're a fraud. That's not an argument. That's getting your undies in a bunch and having a tantrum like a 4-year-old. So anyway.
I just, Doomsayer and I were just shooting the shit before the show, and this came up, and so I was just like, oh my god, like here we go again with this nonsense. So, do want to welcome the show, Game Logic, Falky. By the way, you have a fan on Twitter.
I do. I have.
You do, yes. I can tell you. Oh, I think you responded to her, so there you go.
Hey, anyone's welcome to dial in or jump. Come into the party as long as you pay the piper at the front door. Everyone's welcome.
I told her she is more than welcome to join the show. I don't know if she'll join, but it would be pretty cool to have her on. Let me see. Actually, let me see if she'll join. This would be actually fun. Hold on a sec here.
I'm actually
all right.
Oh, sorry, Brap. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I just Logic. How are you today, sir?
Really good. How are you guys?
Doing good.
Good.
A lot better than earlier, that's for sure. You heard my rant there, Logic.
I wish I would have listened to that show. That actually sounds kind of entertaining.
I'm gonna keep my mouth shut.
Look, it's a I don't know what they call them in America. In Australia, we call them a variety show. So you get different people together and just talk about whatever comes up, and there's always these hot takes either side. It's designed to get an inflamed or hyped up environment for people to just have those reactionary responses. And as I said before, people are entitled to their opinions and people are entitled to say what they want to say, but they tend to veer into opinion and try and restate it as fact. And it just it's entertaining, yeah, but if you take it as the absolute gospel according to Saint whoever, don't just don't just look at it as entertaining. Don't look at it as informative. And that, again, a lot of these shows will rot your brain if you listen to them and think that they're telling you the honest to God's truth.
David, listen, it's just like I sat there and I told Brap before the show. You literally have Google and just look it up. It's right there in front of you. Google is your friend. And I've been told Google is not your friend. It's actually DuckDuckGo, but I'm going to trust Google. It's right there in front of you. But they refuse to read it. That's the problem. It's how can you have this in front of you? And this is everything that they've given you. But you're still sitting there saying, "Oh man, Sony's broke. Sony's broke." It's like, listen, I'm going to say this. It's like this. It's like the school kid yard. You know, the one school or the one kid can't go out for recess, but everybody else can. You know, they just feel bad. Just let it go and just play your goddamn games, man. Who cares where you're playing them? Just play wherever you want to play. It doesn't matter anymore. It just doesn't. One company, Microsoft, needs to do what they're doing. Okay, because that's just the direction that they want to go because of where they put themselves in there. You don't see Sony and Nintendo needing to do that because they're in a good place. I don't understand why a company, you know, desperately needs to change or whatever because another company did. Sorry, Brad, and everybody else.
No, it's fine. It's fine. Excuse me. All right, I do want to get to what everyone's playing right now because I don't think we didn't cover that last week, but sorry, give me a second here.
Oh,
Sorry, I'm just doing some stuff here. All right, so
Well,
yeah, so what is everyone playing? Go ahead, Falky.
I was just going to say, I'm happy to vamp while you're getting yourself organised. What symbol's on your cap, if I might ask, Brap, for anyone who can see us? What symbol have you got on the front of your cap?
Oh,
So I just noticed that Logic's wearing an Avengers, and Doomsayer's got is it
Chris
Death?
Kyle.
The Punisher.
Yeah.
That's right, the Punisher, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, I missed the memo that we had to have caps on. But if you're wearing a Marvel property cap, mate, I'm going to be really annoyed that I missed out on that.
He said that a couple weeks ago too, Brad. He's like, "Did I miss the hat queue? Everybody's wearing hats except for me."
yeah, Falky, you didn't get the memo. You're supposed to wear a hat.
Obviously, I'm obviously not important enough to be on the mailing list.
We all have beards and hats.
The wife is up my
I
ass.
got the beard. I got that much grey in my beard, you probably can't see it.
All right, so what is I'll go to you, Doomsayer. What are you playing right now, sir?
I am trying my best to play Space Marine. I told you we have this new dog. So before I was trying to play downstairs here and the dog decided, "Hey, I'm going to rip up the living room." So I had to stop really quick and go back and doing that. But whenever I get time, I'm playing Space Marine and enjoying it actually a lot.
Yeah, it's one of those games I've would have liked to get to, but just you know, I think I'm that 30% game logic or whatever it was Piscatella talked about today. you know, well, no, I'm definitely not the 30% because I bought some games this year. So, but yeah, all right.
That's interesting analysis too.
Yeah, did you? Yeah, we'll get to that, Falky, because I thought that was it's a good conversation, some good insight there, from our good buddy Matt Piscatella. What about you, Falky? Today I hate it. So, what are you playing right now? That's what it says on your coffee mug.
I don't know if you can see. It's Mr. Grumpy. I got this one for Father's Day a couple of years ago. As anybody who works for me,
Is your family trying to tell you something? They're like, David.
Oh no, there's no subtle hints. I get daily reminders about how much of a grumpy ass I am. But I mean, when you're surrounded by idiots, what can you do? What was the question? What am I playing? Dave the Diver has been getting a fair hiding when I have been able to get some gaming in this week. It's been a pretty busy week actually, but I've got a couple of hours across the week into Dave the Diver. I'm really enjoying that, especially the tie-in stuff. And a bit of, mentioned that to, it might have been Thrifty's show. I was chatting to him. Anyway, yeah, the tie-in stuff with Dredge and Yakuza Pirate Yakuza thing, they're pretty fun. Those tie-ins that they do. I'm looking forward to that when the Pirate Yakuza one kicks in. But yeah, Dave the Divers is I'm having a lot of fun with that. It's got good, quick little loops. You can make them longer if you want to make them longer. The upgrade path, the skill trees, and all that is pretty simple. And yeah, it's got a lot of inventory collection, a bit of inventory management. The way the levels are generated, they're not always the same, so they're sort of similar. I don't even know how to explain it. Key things are in similar spots, and you know where sort of to go to find them, but the level changes each time you go in there with the sort of where the obstacles within the box are. And as you progress through, different fish and sea creatures and those sort of fun things pop in. I got to play as Godzilla over last weekend when I was playing it. They had that Godzilla tie-in piece to go with the anniversary of Godzilla -1 movie coming out. The 1-year anniversary on that. They did a tie-in with that. It was pretty cool. I got to fight as Godzilla, and my young fella thought that was amazing because he loves Godzilla. But yeah, mostly Dave the Diver, and I did a little bit more on Lost Judgment this morning, trying to wrap that one up so I can get on to some other games.
All right, good stuff, Falky. What about you, Logic?
I've been playing Call of Duty as usual, but I've also played a tiny bit of Lost Records, Bloom and Rage this week, and then also hit up a little bit of Titanfall 2.
Oh, dude, Titanfall 2 is a great game. Great game. The single player campaign of that game is excellent. What about Titanfall 3?
It's been out for a while, hasn't it?
Titanfall 2 came out. When did Titanfall 2 come out? 2000.
It was whatever year. I can't remember. The big thing about that one was it got crunched in between Call of Duty and Battlefield that year.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah, they didn't give it. They didn't. I don't remember.
I'm double checking.
I just remember that traversal mechanic in the campaign was really good.
2016.
Yeah, they got smashed right between those two releases. Yeah, it was a shame because it was a great game.
Yeah, 10 years later, and it's still fondly spoken about.
Yeah,
so,
yeah. No, it was
that's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah, that was what was his? That was what's his name's baby? Who? What the hell's his name? Who made Titanfall?
Zampella.
Zampella, yeah. Yep, that was his baby. And then they ended up getting acquired by EA over that.
Now, isn't he?
Yeah, he's over Battlefield now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting because I remember when Titanfall released on the Xbox One, it was a timed exclusive, and then I think shortly after Zampella, I forget the name of his. What's the name of his studio again?
Respawn Entertainment.
Respawn Entertainment. Thank you.
That's his new studio after he and his partner were removed from Activision by the jackbooted security people who came and yanked him out.
Yeah, why did he get fired from Activision?
I think the most popular scuttlebutt is that basically there were like back end additional royalties or whatever that were supposed to go to that studio that Activision was like when Activision made the deal, it didn't really know how big when they purchased Infinity Ward or made the publishing deal. I can't remember if they were. Yeah, they're owned by Activision. So when they acquired them, they didn't realize how much Call of Duty was going to blow up. Back in those days, like a lot of people played Call of Duty, but it was not this global, like, one ring to rule them all that it became. And so I think the additional payments that were due to them had just gotten so big that Activision had never foreseen it. And I think they were basically refusing to pay them or were choosing to interpret them very much so in their favor, not in Infinity Ward's. So I think that's what it came down to.
Okay. Yeah, I couldn't remember all the deets, so I appreciate that logic. Yeah. Yeah. So Yeah, I just remember Titanfall just coming out. It was, I mean, it was just a solid multiplayer game. It didn't have the campaign that came with Titanfall 2. And I remember a lot of people were upset that they were charging $60 for a game that just only had multiplayer. Remember that was kind of like the big stink. Um, and I don't remember how the game did commercially. I think it did well. It garnered a sequel, so would imagine it did something. But I do remember that it was kind of a big stink amongst gamers that, oh, how are they charging $60? I remember the part of the what people were saying about the game was that it was an incomplete game. So, which I didn't think it was. I thought it was a great game. But anyhow, all right. So I'm playing the first Berserker Kazan. I don't know how to pronounce that correctly. The demo's out right now. And I was Logic and I were talking about this earlier. It's actually pretty interesting. It's an action adventure RPG. It combines this cell shaded, like the characters are cell shaded, and then the a lot of the terrain and world, the atmosphere seems more realistic than it does cell shaded, which is kind of interesting. So it kind of combines that cell shaded and like real world atmosphere. And the game it reminds me a little bit of Wukong. Some of those Wukong vibes when you do like when you dodge on time. Like if you guys have played Black Myth Wukong, when you dodge, like you time the dodging correctly, it leaves like a trail of your character. Like you see kind of like a ghosting of your character where he was. It's the same thing in this game too, and it definitely reminds me of it's a Souls like. There's some God of War vibes, probably because he's dual wielding. One of the weapons he's using is an axe, and but definitely he's got like a lot of that parrying system. You can upgrade your character stats, your weapons, your armor, things like that. So I've liked what I played so far. The game comes out March 27th of this year, so retails for $60. It's I don't know. I like it, but I don't know if I'm going to go out and buy it. We'll see, because there's other games I want to get to. There's Avowed's out there. I definitely want to try out Avowed. That's why one of the reasons why I kept my Game Pass subscription. So, but definitely something it's out there if you're interested in those Souls like action adventure RPG games. The demo's out there, maybe worth a try. So, has anyone played the demo besides me, or?
Played a little bit. I thought it was
What do you think,
was pretty
Falky?
pretty handy. Yeah. No, I liked it. There's a few that are lucky to have accessed the full game to do pre-launch previews and that sort of stuff that I've seen. Really, they've talked really highly about it. Somewhere between a not hard Souls like game with some other RPG elements, and I actually thought the combat was pretty good. Once you get into the groove, it like any of those sort of games, once you get into the groove or into the rhythm of how fights go, I found it to be very fun, and that's probably a word I haven't used for game for a while. I find it was quite fun, even though it was challenging as shit for me. I found it pretty fun in the hour and a half of the demo that I played. So I'm looking forward to it. Not buying it day one. It, as usual, I'm a tight ass, so I don't buy anything day one. But yeah, I look forward to jumping onto it when I get through a bit more of my backlog. Probably when it's down around $40 on its first sale rotation. I think it'll do really well, particularly in some of the people who liked playing the Souls-like games, but also in those that like the more retro style. I don't know, hack and slash games we used to get. It reminds me of I can't remember the name of it, but there was a game back in the, I'd say, PS2 era, which was sort of like a side scroller with a couple of big swords, and you used to just slash the crap out of everyone, but it would just get harder and harder and harder and harder until you died, and then you get sent back again. But yeah, I thought it was pretty cool. It kind of reminded me also of like Transistor or Bastion or one of those sort of games where it's a
Yeah.
bit more rogue-like, but it
Yeah.
was a bit more structured in the battle, and it's not so much roam around and kill. Like it's less dungeon crawling and it's more battling. That's how I found it anyway. But yeah, I don't know if anyone's interested in that sort of Souls-like or in that zone for the sword play and the fighting styles, but by all means give it a look and hit up the demo. It's worth it's worth 90 minutes, 120 minutes of your time to just try it out and see if you like it. So.
Yeah, Falky, I don't like. I didn't think what I played. I don't think, and I haven't played the full demo yet. I'm still crawling my way through it, but I didn't find it like as and maybe it does get a little bit harder, but I didn't think it was as hard as the Souls games. Which if
You're
that
good at them.
well, I mean, I wouldn't
You're
say
good
I'm.
at them. I suck at them.
Well, I wouldn't say I'm good at them. I just I have a high threshold of pain for Souls games. you have to yeah, you have to just accept with Souls games you're going to get your ass kicked. And with the Elden Ring DLC, I mean, I mean, there was a few bosses where I was like, okay, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm going to call in the cavalry and I'm going to call Air Cuts for the win and T-Rock and we're going to team up together and even then, like, there was bosses that were kicking our asses, because those bosses will scale up, so it isn't, like a real 3-on-1. But I didn't think, from what I played so far, I didn't think it was as hard as the Souls games. I thought it struck a nice balance of being like not Souls hard, but not too easy, not like a button masher.
You got to think about what you're doing.
Yeah, you do have to think about what you're doing. The parry, the dodge, the parrying, and the block, and the different attacks. Like you could do like a more visceral attack. I think with the Y button. I was playing on Xbox. I don't know if you were playing on PlayStation, but so I think it's the triangle. I don't remember the button layouts now. But no, I thought it was but I like that though, because it didn't seem like it was too hard. It seemed like it might be one of those games, at least for me, that I could just pick up and play and have a good time with maybe. So but I'm definitely gonna put some more time into it this weekend and probably have some additional impressions next week on the show as well. So is that it, gentlemen, in terms of games we're playing right now? All right, Doomsayer. Doomsayer, who's your friend who always harasses Falky? What's his name?
Oh boy.
Retro.
Yeah. Is he in here?
No.
Okay.
I have not seen him. We did let him know that I was going to be on tonight and David and Logic, so I'm surprised.
He's probably having a sook. His cornflakes are probably full of something that he doesn't like.
He's what? I don't know.
No, I'm sorry. I'm just picking on him because he's not here. I was going to say someone's probably peed in his cornflakes and he's having a sook about it.
Yeah. That's funny.
No, he's all right.
Yeah.
All
right, gentlemen. Did you guys catch the? I don't know how many of you subscribe to the Patreon of Sacred Symbols, Last End Media, but and Shuei's been making the rounds. He is retired. He's collecting his. I don't know if he got a pension.
Hey Brad, can I interrupt you for 1 sec?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, I just want to do a quick lesson learned PSA for people in the chat. So we got a guy in here talking about he's praising Xbox because it's American technology versus Japanese. We don't do that here. So I asked for that individual to put timeout. What I didn't put on the end of that is somebody put him in timeout or I will. So if I have to get down on my seat, it's not going to be a timeout. You're just going to be gone. Don't bring that idiocy in here.
I totally agree. I'm glad you said it because I was going to say, boy, that's a really shit. I put in there a shit comment. What the hell does American technology and Japanese technology have to do with it?
Bro, World War II, right? Ended 80 years ago. Like the last generation has moved on. We don't do that here.
Right.
Jesus Christ. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Brad.
Yeah, I totally missed him saying that. But yeah, you've been warned. That sort of dialogue is definitely not welcomed here on the show. Yeah. So, yeah, fuck around and find out. All right. So where was I? Oh, Shuei Yoshida. He's doing his rounds. Falky, he's retired. He's got, I don't know if Sony offers pensions. I don't know. Falky, do they offer pensions?
Yeah.
So
Oh
he's getting,
yeah, he
oh,
got
so
a big one.
he's got a big
He
one.
got
Okay.
a big one.
So he's enjoying retirement. He's doing interviews now. He did an interview with Colin Moriarty of we've had Colin on the show as well. I did an interview with Colin, Last Stand Media, Sacred Symbols. It's actually behind the Patreon paywall right now. If you wait a couple days, it'll probably be out on the YouTube channel. Great interview, by the way. Just great.
Isn't it interesting that Colin Moriarty, and as much as Greg annoys me sometimes, Greg Miller's interview with him as well.
Yeah, that interview was
Isn't it
good
nice
too.
to
Yeah.
see someone who? Isn't it nice to see someone who knows how to do an interview, do the interviews, as opposed to these people who think they're journalists and think they know how to do an interview, just botching the thing up. The appreciation for, again, like them or hate them, the appreciation for someone doing the job well is way understated in this day and age.
Yeah, no, I I didn't, I'd like I didn't catch the whole Kind of Funny interview, but I didn't think it was bad. It Kind of Funny had a great interview with I thought with Matt Piscatella as well, which we'll talk about that. But the Shuei interview with Colin Moriarty was actually really good, very insightful, by the way. Talks about some of the things we've talked about on this show, in terms of, Colin asked him about, should Sony put their games day and date? And I don't remember everything, all the questions. I did write some things down. I was trying to take notes. I was working and then trying to take notes and work at the same time I was listening to the podcast. So that didn't totally go over well. But I thought it was interesting because he talked about like the evolution of the PlayStation business. Like, he talks about, working under Kaz and then Yoshida coming in, and then, like the leadership really getting kind of more hands-on, with the PlayStation business and really understanding gaming, where, under Kaz and previous PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2 gen, like Sony didn't really, some of the leadership didn't really understand the gaming industry or the gaming business as much as leadership does now. So he talked a little bit about that. He talks about Jim Ryan taking over. And what's interesting too is, the conversation about live service came up, right? The online games. And he talked about, some of the online games that they came out with back in the days, Killzone, SOCOM being the other one. And he talked about the challenges of releasing, I think Doomsay's about to fall asleep. What's going on, man? What's going on?
I'm just sitting here reading the chat, and it's just like, Jesus Christ.
Hey, do we have to have an intervention in the chat?
Xbox better. It's like,
oh my gosh. All right. We're not.
Sorry. I'm sorry, Brav. I'm going to go off camera so you don't see it.
No. You look like you're falling asleep. I was like,
no.
Yeah,
I got
Stay on.
8 cups of coffee in me today.
Hey,
so.
Brad, while you're taking a break, why don't you grab T-Rock's super chat?
yeah, let me do that real quick. All right. T-Rock with the $5 super chat is back. Blah, I said back. Brap. That Berserker Dimmer has been out. I also played Night Rain Network Test. So how was the Night Rain Network Test, T-Rock? Let me know in the live chat. Thank you for that super chat too, by the way. So where was I? So, hey, Dupes here, are you a mod on the channel?
Not that I know of.
All right, you should be. I'll have to find you in the chat. I don't know if you've been typing, but anyhow, she talks about
the only one of the four of us that's not watching the chat.
I'm not watching the chat.
Oh, don't worry. I'm sitting here, watching the chat and that. So
yeah, I'm trying to.
You need me to read anything? I mean, I got a 4th grade level reading, so I should be.
I'm trying to look at my my notes here, my chicken scratch from from working and trying to listen to this interview with Shuei with Colin Moriarty. But he talked about like just the challenges of releasing multiplayer games on one platform, right? He's like, you really, with those types of games, you want to try to capture as many players as possible because those games rely on larger communities, which We all know. We all talked about that, right? But you talked about the difference of Sony going day and date with their first party multiplayer stuff on PC versus the single player. Why those and why those perspectives of those things are done differently, right? Um, so what's interesting is he talked about when Jim Ryan took over. And Falky, I don't know if you brought this up, but a lot of the remember there was a lot of conversation around the investment of money into live service, and people were like, "Oh, they're scaling down the investment of single player content, and they're putting more money in online." You remember that?
Mm. Oh yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
Falky's like, uh-huh. And he talks about that. He says when he basically says Jim Ryan takes over, the investors are talking to Sony Corp, and and he says investors they like the live service games because investors they like that live service games are more predictable,
Yeah.
reoccurring revenue. I feel like we've talked about this on the show before.
I'm sure we have.
So he talks about these things, and that the investors were like they wanted, and Sony Corp came up to Jim Ryan. They wanted Jim Ryan to invest more in live service, kind of give it a shot, right? And
Yeah.
so that's where that investment of dollars came from. And I thought it was really insightful because I don't think up until this point, I don't think we really know or knew the kind of behind the scenes of why Sony decided to, under Jim Ryan's leadership, decided to invest more in the in live service games. And it seems like it's the investors saying, "Hey, we want you guys to try this," and Jim Ryan saying, "Okay." And Logic, you and I talked about this earlier today too, about when you're up and you're trying to get those budgetary dollars, the money in funding, you're probably not going to say no to these things. I think that I don't want to correct me if I'm wrong. I think that's kind of what you had alluded to. So kind of walk because I don't think people know about that Logic. I don't think people understand kind of that behind the scenes and how that budgetary process works. And if the corporation's coming to you and saying, "Hey, we want you to try these things, we want you to take these dollars," I don't want to say your hands tied behind your back, but you kind of have to. You have a fiduciary responsibility to your investors to try to make them more money. You're probably going to do these things. Falky, what's going on, man?
Sorry.
You seem like you're chomping at the bit to say something.
For those who can't see me, I am sitting here with the biggest Cheshire cat grin on my face. Like it's stuff we spoke about years ago, and all of a sudden, someone who was very high up in PlayStation or is effectively doing his victory lap. And fair enough, he should be out there talking about all the good stuff that he did because he did an awful lot of good stuff. There's some stuff that he did that people aren't happy about, but the Moriarty interview and the Greg Miller interview and a couple of others that have come through, but particularly this Moriarty interview, there's stuff coming out of that which is Jim Ryan's copping it for stuff that he had absolutely nothing to do with. But the two things I find most interesting about what you've just touched on is one, this idea of here's two options and you've effectively got one choice. Do this. Now, the investors pushed through Sony's bosses, who are still there, down to the point of saying, chase the live service. Jim Ryan's response to that was, okay, I'll set it up so that I can get my studios to do that. However, we're going to chew into the profit margin and you're not going to complain to me about that, Mr. Investor. Investors signed off on that because to go under those metrics for that long, the investors, and without the retribution that came through, to sit at 6, 5, and 4% profit margin for years whilst chasing some kind of output is a strategic decision undertaken with the blessing of the shareholders and the board. That's not something that Jim can do and then still have a job in 18 months' time. So he's done that, chewed into their profit margin, expanded the studios, and offered it to the studios in a sense that, hey, we've got this that we want to pursue. I'm not going to force you to do it, but here's an incentive. I'll give you X amount more money to build up the team to do it. And that's coming from Shuhei. That's in complete contrast to what everybody's been saying for the last well, I say everybody, most everybody's been saying for the last 4 years that Jim Ryan's forced the studios to do this at the detriment of single player games. Well, it turns out that somebody who was well in the know, because was involved with the decision making at the time, has said, no, that's not accurate. This is what has happened. And there's an awful lot of people that have got eggs sitting on their face now that look really stupid, who swore black and blue that Jim Ryan fucked everything up. And turns out it wasn't Jim. That it was not done as forceful, it was done as optional. But again, it's the option is either do this or miss out. And no studio head is going to say, Christ, I'm going to miss out on extra funding. Because if you're a smart studio or unit leader, you say, yep, I'll take the extra money and I will pursue this to the degree that I need to make sure I keep the funding coming. And if it turns out that it doesn't pass the QA test and it gets cut off, well, what have we lost? Nothing. We've had extra money that I can siphon off from this main project to other projects because I'm really smart at my budgeting. And if you're really good at doing that, that's what you can do in those large level businesses. You can pull millions of dollars out of one project and put into other projects if you're smart about it. But the notion that it was forced upon the studios at the detriment of single player games, no. And here we have someone confirming that. Most of us that are in the know, who read the stuff in detail, who listen to the investor calls, who know how the metrics and ratios work, myself and the rest of us on this chat today, have all been saying the same thing. It's not showing up in the behavior of certain people and the numbers that are coming out to suggest that they are killing studios by forcing them to do games as a service. So that's one thing. And then the second thing that came out of it was, everyone said, oh, Shuhei was forced into that role because Jim wanted to sack him. Well, no, Jim didn't want to sack him. Jim got put into that job and said to Shuhei, there's nothing else for you to go up to do. There's no spots for you up in Sony Group itself. And there's nothing here in PlayStation world or SIE world that would not be a massive demotion for you. I'll create something for you to go and do that is what you love to do. And we get to keep you for another 4 or 5 years, and it solves a problem that I have. Or a perceived problem that we have.
To your point, Falky, Shuhei in the interview acknowledges the perception that Sony didn't care about indies. And Jim understood the value of indies too. He's like, I want you to go out and cultivate those relationships because there is this perception. Yeah. So it's interesting. We so as much as we say that Sony kind of tunes the noise out, a couple things that stood out to me in the interview is Shuhei talks about the perception was we didn't care, that we no longer cared about indies, because that was a talking point from the PS4 generation. So they do listen to some extent. He also brings up Metacritic, by the way. Which did he bring up Metacritic? I think he did. Or I might be confusing him and Matt Piscatella. Maybe they both did. Anyhow, I heard Metacritic come up, which is another thing. People say Metacritic doesn't matter. No, it does. I mean, we know that some developer bonuses are based off of Metacritic, and so. But no, I thought that was interesting when he talked about that perception of PlayStation, and now he's tasked with, okay, we need to go out and we need to cultivate these relationships with indies. We have been known for kind of cultivating relationships with those smaller studios, right? He did also
what he did 20 years previous.
Yeah. And he talked about he talked about the change of leadership too. He said, look, Jim wanted to bring in his own people too. He wanted to bring in his own, his own leadership group, and he kind of alluded himself as the kind of, I don't want to say the old guard of PlayStation, but in many ways was, right? And now Jim, but Jim had been there a long time too. But now this is a different. Jim's newer. This is different. He wants to bring in his own people. That's not totally uncommon. We see that in corporations, right, where there's leadership changes. Common. Yeah,
especially in big. And I've said it a few times before, but especially in organizations where they have the policies or the processes of rotating their management, because they have a promotional pathway for developing talent and constantly promoting them up and up and up and up. And that keeps your standards quite high, but it also keeps your management ideas fresh. And when you get to the top end, the closer you get to the pointy end of the structures, the less roles there are available. So unless people are retiring or opting to go somewhere else, when you start cycling through this your senior management structures, someone's going to miss out on the musical chairs. So yeah, and Jim didn't have a spot under his control to just slot Shuhei straight into, so he made one. So and it worked out well. So
Yeah, and the other thing too, he talked about that they weren't being told to stop single player, but it was keep doing single player, but also do this thing in addition to. That was one of the other things that people said wasn't happening, that they were told to how do you ask a question here, Trippy? Just ask the question in the chat and one of us will see it. So that was interesting. Again, a different perspective from leadership that really kind of, as I'm listening to this, really just reminded me of how off base a lot of people were with the live service stuff.
Yep.
Whether you agree with it or not, people were like, it's all on Jim Ryan. And clearly that's a decision that's coming top down, right?
Yeah. I mean, Jim's not got unilateral control on some of that stuff. And as I pointed out, that the outcome of the financial performance for a long time was indicating really early on it was a strategic decision to chew into the profit margins to chase that live service point. And as I said the other week, quality control is what killed 90% of those live service games. I don't think, and other than the clarification about what's a first party, what's a second, and what's a third party game that was part of the interviews as well, which is a talking point in and of its own. I don't think PlayStation has actually gotten a first party studio that was there when they started this to actually get a live service game out into the market, because Bungie hasn't gotten Marathon out yet. I think it's next in line, but you wouldn't classify Destiny 2 as a first party live service game. It shouldn't be classified because it's been out forever. Helldivers is published and by PlayStation and co-developed by investment from PlayStation, but it's still Arrowhead's game. And I can't think of any others that have popped out of first-party studios that made it out. So correct me if I'm wrong there. I just can't think of any.
Yeah, I can't either.
Second parties and third parties maybe, but no first parties. So
the only other one I'm thinking of is was it the Fair Games, and that's
Fair
not
Games. It still hasn't come out yet.
It hasn't come out.
and that got delayed to what, next year or something like that?
Yeah. The interesting
but the partnership arrangements in the third party games don't have the high level of quality assurance that PlayStation applies to its internal stuff. And if these games all got cancelled because they couldn't climb over the quality hurdles, well, that just shows that it was attempted and it was unsuccessful due to different reasons. But it's not a commercial, it's not a financial failure. They just couldn't get it done, and they want to focus, like the Naughty Dog thing. They wanted to focus on getting their single player stuff, and they realized that a live service game was going to chew up way too much. So, I mean, I'm sorry, I keep dragging into this conversation. I need to be quiet, but the information that's coming out from Shuhei, and I can't believe he didn't have an NDA slapped on him before he left, but just the information that's coming out from him is absolute gold in terms of opening the curtain. And so many people who swore black and blue that it was 1,000,000% they were right. That's what I said at the start of this thing. They were so sure that they're right, and then all of a sudden they get pointed out that they were wrong. And not just a little bit misled. They were completely wrong. And not a single one of them has put their hand up and said, yep, you know what? I got that wrong. I'll accept responsibility for my misjudgments, and I apologize for it. They just double down and keep saying, no, Shuhei's lying to us. Well, good luck to you.
Oh my God. All right. The other thing he talked about was we talked about the live service stuff with Jim Ryan. He talked about their approach on acquisitions, which I think we all knew that they have that history of working together. The Concord thing's interesting because he was there for the signing of that studio that became Firewalk Studio. He talks about that, and he signed. correct me if I'm wrong, Falky. I'm assuming you listened to the interview because you're talking about it, but I believe he like greenlit Concord or was like, yeah, like let's make this game. Was that or was that my am I misinterpreting what he
So
said there?
my understanding from what it was put in the interview was that he was there as part of the team that agreed to pursue that game and do the acquisition to get that game to market. Not so different to what they'd done with Rise of the Ronin and Stellar Blade and other arrangements at around that time where they had identified games that they thought were really good and had those conversations around, do you want investment or do you want to be acquired? How do you want help with this? And the studio that was making Concord opted to be acquired and then nestled in under the guidance of XDev, I think it was, to get that game finished, and the expertise and points are there. So Shuhei was involved in identifying it, putting it forward, and then final, the agreements around, will this thing be any good? But it's not just on Shuhei or not just on Jim Ryan. There's a team of people that have those discussions and make those decisions. But again, like, he was involved in it and he identified it that he thought it was going to be great. Didn't turn out that way, but once identified and then it goes into the meat grinder, there's no way knowing what the sausage is going to look like when it spits out the other end because so much stuff can change.
Yeah, you know what's interesting? It made me think if and again I don't think we have an exact date of when this happened, when that green light or that interest in Concord happened, but my interpretation was like this may have happened a couple years ago, and maybe at the time of where that game was, the idea of that game maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I think it was how long was that game in development for, by the way? A couple years, right? I think it was.
They claim it started 8 years ago, but
So
I mean, pre-production for some games changes 3 or 4 times, and then they get into it, and then when you get building it, things change in the middle of building them as well. So
yeah, so you start. So my only thing that I was going through my mind was the world of line service games, at least in my opinion, seems to shift pretty quickly. And maybe what was working well at the design concept that's when they're thinking about what they're going to build as they're going through that, maybe some of those things just don't work as they progress through the development cycle, right? As newer live service games come out. That's the only. I mean, that's what I was just kind of like, maybe that's what led to that game not really finding its mark. Because I seem to remember some of the complaints about Concord that it may have had some archaic concepts to it that maybe just weren't relative or made sense in today's live service landscape. But that again, that's just something I was thinking about as he was talking about it. That this game was greenlit years ago, and that could be maybe a challenge with live service games, right? Where an idea may make sense, but then you get to that 4 or 5, 6 year development window, you release. Maybe what worked then doesn't work now for live service games.
Yeah, and there's a heap of positives and a heap of non-positives that come out of that Concord, so the Concord disaster, respectfully. Mechanically, very, very polished. The gameplay and all the rest of it, very, very polished. There were just some aspects in it that, that a hero shooter, there's plenty of them. Saturated market, characters lacking a little bit, promotion and marketing, grassroots campaign, not really what you need for one of those. You need the big bombastic marketing point, and no story mode or anything like that, or very lacking in content when it popped out, other than a 5v5. Like, and the people who played it and loved it, but there just wasn't enough of them, and it costs an awful lot of money to run a live service game. So, and after Helldivers 2 coming out and being such a smash hit, what was there sitting there to say that this wasn't going to do the same thing? So, and that's where the QA team needs to pick up some learnings from. But anyway.
Yeah. The other, speaking of PC, talks about PCs, PC releases. And he talked about how PC is a way for them to reach new audiences. He mentioned that when publishers release games on PC, they typically sell the most in the US and in China. He talked about China being a big PC market. He said that with, releasing some of their first party content on PlayStation, the thought process is that someone plays like, Last of Us Part 1, The Last of Us Part 2, they play it on PC. The Last of Us Part 2 comes out, that maybe those individuals might be convinced to go buy a PlayStation to play the sequel to The Last of Us Part 2 instead of waiting. He also said this part is kind of interesting. He talked about PC development, and it made me think about the conversations we've had on this show, Logic, about running parallel development between console and PC. But he said porting to PC is cheaper than actually having to create a brand new title. He didn't say anything about running development in parallel, but it did make me think about some of those conversations that we've had. I know, Falky, you've talked about, and I know, Logic, you guys have talked about, like, I think, what was it, software depreciation, Logic? I think that's the correct term, right?
Well, it's not software depreciation; it's depreciation of capital expenses.
Thank you. There you go.
Or capital investment.
Yeah. So, so he talks about, like, just that it's cheaper to to port games over, and that's kind of like printing money for them. The other thing was kind of interesting. He said he wasn't interested in taking game IP to become television shows and movies. His concern was that Hollywood or television shows would do more harm than good to the IPs. But Herman Hulse was the one, and there was someone else he mentioned that really kind of took that and ran with it. He's been pleasantly surprised with how well some of the adaptations of some of their movies, if you guys saw the Gran Turismo movie, there's the TV show for what the hell is that game called?
Metal.
Twisted Metal, which actually I was surprised by that, by the way. I wasn't expecting. I was kind of like on the fence when they showed the trailers for that, and actually watching it, I was like, oh, this is actually pretty good. I thought it was pretty good. I'm looking forward to season 2. Dude, say you're nodding your head. Yeah,
I actually enjoyed it.
Yeah,
I did enjoy it.
Yeah, I was really surprised. I'm like, okay, I'm ready for season 2 now. I think season 2 is getting ready to come out soon too. Let me grab the super chat here by Quick Shadow with the $5 super chat. Thank you. I'm sorry, Quick Shadow. Street Shadow says, in the Yoshida interview, explains how Sony views first, second, third party. It's summarized on Push Square. Might be good to check it out. Thank you for that super chat. I did not see or get to that part of the interview where he talks about first party, second party. Although it's interesting, he talks about. I don't think this was on Colin's show. It was another interview where he talked about the studio closure of Japan Studios. A lot of people were upset about that, and he said, "Look, like the reason why we closed the studio is because there's just really no." He said the market became very difficult for AA games. He said that most of Sony Japan Studios releases fell into that category. He said, for example, after Gravity Rush 2, director Kishiro Toyama tried to come up with a new concept, but we were not able to greenlight any of his new concepts, even though they were really interesting. Sony was looking for AAA titles, so we really struggled to get the game going. Again, he talks about, I know a lot of people are upset about the Japan studio, but these are some of the realities of when the market's not supporting a specific game. And we talk about it, the juice being worth the squeeze. It seems like Studio Japan was a victim of just the lack of interest by the market of AA games. And I will say, having played Gravity Rush, those are really good games. Really good games. I don't know, has anyone on the panel played any of the Gravity Rush games?
What's it like?
So it's a cell shaded game, and it basically there's definitely platforming elements to this game, but it takes a unique twist on platforming because it like basically inverts gravity on you, on your character, like in game. So like sometimes you're like, I don't even know how to describe it, like you're upside down. I'm definitely not doing the game justice, by the way.
Crap, you're giving me bad memories of Ori, the first Ori, because I know you played that, where you're the side scroll, you're normal, and then all of a sudden you have to go back up, to
Yeah.
reversal and all that kind of
Yeah.
thing. So it's
Let me see. Hold on a sec here. Let me see if I can pull up. So Gravity Rush actually came out on the PSP, if I'm not mistaken, and then it was released on the PlayStation 4, and that remake or remaster or port to PlayStation 4 is actually done really well. And then they got a sequel. The sequel is really good too.
Okay.
I forget the protagonist, and I think it was Kat. Maybe I think that was her name.
I think both of them might be in the PS Plus catalog or something like that too.
Yeah, they are.
Remembering.
Yeah, let me see something here real quick. See if I can find some gameplay. So, give me a sec here. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? The hell is it? Gravity Rush, Gravity Rush. Oh, here we go. All right. See if I can pull this up here real quick. You said it's on PlayStation. What's it called now?
David,
PlayStation Classics.
is it essential or premium?
No, it's in. One of them is in the Classics catalog, and the other one's in the Essentials.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is even like you see how she's like flying, like even like her way her body like twists, and then she'll land like sideways. Like it's actually a really good game. See, like the way she like floats in the air and then she kind of like twists, like it does throw you off a bit. And then there's certain ways you have to like maneuver in the air to get like to certain like parts of the map.
Okay.
Yeah, it's actually I thought it was actually one of the better games I played last gen. I really liked it a lot. So I mean, understandably, I could see why some of the fans were upset about the studio closure, but all right, let me
It definitely looks interesting. I'll definitely give it a try.
yeah, I mean, if you have if you're on PlayStation, if you have the subscription service, excuse me, yeah, definitely try it. Excuse me. Oh my god, sorry, I mean the need coffee. Here down there says it's vertigo inducing. I could see that. Yeah, yeah. So it came out on Vita, and then the port to Vita, the PS4 was actually done really well. See, Josh here, so I got the Plaid on Vita and PS4.
So in Brap, while it might not be a popular question, Trippy asked the question in chat that you told him to.
Oh, okay. Let me see that. I didn't see that question.
I'll just read it out. I got it up on the screen here.
Yeah, go ahead.
With all these Xbox titles now coming to PlayStation, should we be concerned about being drowned out? What happens to its first-party output? Is the incentive compromised?
I'm happy to take lead on or first response on that.
Yeah, go ahead.
I've been. Well, Josh is probably. Xbox is going to have to really crank its quality of output up. Doesn't matter what its volume is. It's going to have to crank its quality of output up to compete on the PlayStation storefront to get the traction that they need, because they're not just competing against PlayStation first-party titles. They're now competing against every title that's on there in those genres that could be considered a competition. So if they manage to climb over that hurdle, which would take them a fair bit of effort, then the question is, will they actually be a driving force to buy a PlayStation console or invest in the PlayStation ecosystem through PS Plus or whatever else is there? PlayStation's first party is primarily there to do exactly that. Drive the sales in the platform, drive the engagement into and people coming onto the platform. Now PlayStation can do that with third party, no problem, as long as the third party quality is top shelf. But they've always, in their business model, had their first party driving that. And interview with Shuhei and other commentary around it, that hasn't changed. The Xbox games coming to PlayStation does not change that requirement that from my perspective, that the first party studios can just relax, because they still need that output and that exclusivity if that people don't like that word, let's call it the rarity of being able to play games on the PlayStation platform. And it may be that it's not just a console, but it's through Steam. But it doesn't make any difference. There's still an engagement point there, that the focus is on PlayStation and what it can do in terms of selling that ecosystem or that platform through to more people. At the moment, they've got 75 million PS5s and 130 million monthly active users at the end of December. That is a very attractive customer base to be producing games and selling games to. The Xbox games coming to PlayStation won't change that. And it was fairly evident with Call of Duty selling 80-something% of its copies on PlayStation for what was sold. So there's no tangible evidence at this stage to suggest that it would cause issues with PlayStation studios or for them to become complacent. And considering how hard they push each other all the time in competing for funding to get projects off the ground to begin with, and then the outputs hitting the quality levels that they internally need them to, the other publishers and stuff that's coming out of China is a great example of this. There's other publishers that don't have those massive overheads that are actually pushing the medium forward in terms of quality and output. And Black Myth Wukong is a great example of that. Phantom Blade Zero is going to be another great example of that. Lost Souls aside, yes, PlayStation's publishing that, but that looks amazing, and that's still running in UE4. There's pressure not just coming from other platforms. The pressure is coming from other publishers. And fair enough if they've only got the option of, say Steam or PlayStation is, the end point that, may be the case where Xbox is just putting games on PlayStation and they don't have their own console, but they've got their own ecosystem on PC. It's still not enough to drag down PlayStation studios. Now, it might be that PlayStation doesn't have to chase and have 25 or 30 studios to keep the output up, but they've got a saturation point of 3 to 4 major first-party title releases in a year, and that's a very busy year for them in amongst all the third-party stuff that they do. Plus the partnership arrangements and all the rest of it, they wouldn't want more studios than what they've currently got, and they're downsizing to keep the quality up. So that's my perspective on it. I don't think they need to spend more money for smaller margins to worry about that.
Yeah, the other one of the other things you talked about too is Sony's approach to putting platforms and other titles. We've when they brought Horizon Legos to Nintendo Switch, it's kind of interesting. A lot of the narrative around that move was, they're putting their first party games on other platforms. Spider-Man's coming to Xbox. That's your favorite doomsayer. But it's interesting. He talks about their perspective, Sony's perspective on different platforms, and how, they don't look at Nintendo within the same lens as they do Xbox. They actually look at Xbox as the competitor, right? They're going after the same market. In that regard, they're not going to put games on Xbox because they're essentially going after the same consumer base. Where Nintendo, it's a little bit different. He's like, they look at Nintendo as a different consumer market where you tend to have younger demographic of gamers, and so they're probably more likely to definitely more likely they're open to putting games on Nintendo than they are on Xbox. And then Colin mentioned that interview, like even with the Metal Gear game, there's a mode that's not going to be on Xbox. I think that's going to be only on PlayStation. What's Doomsayer? What's going on, man?
Everybody keeps saying Spider-Man is coming to Xbox.
Yeah,
and then Nate has to say.
Yeah. No, I know that's kind of a thing, but I say it like not to, not to be funny. I say it because people have been saying that, but they again, here's Shuei telling you, like, this is the corporation's view of these two different platforms. We're probably not going to support, and I'm paraphrasing here. I'm just me extrapolating what he's saying is like, hey, we're probably more likely to support Nintendo because it's a different consumer base than it is Xbox. Xbox is in our same space. We're not going to support a competitor that's in our same space. We're just not going to do that. So he talks about that. I thought that was, again, I think that's kind of what we've talked about here on this show too. But it's interesting. People don't think about those things when they think about Nintendo, or they think about, like you've often talked about on this show, Logic, about the market stratification of the gaming industry, right? And how people tend to, oh God, we were talking about it earlier today. People tend to, because Matt Piscatella talked about it in his interview at Kinda Funny. I forget what Matt said. People tend to take their own experiences and apply to the rest of the market. I think that's what Matt said. I'm paraphrasing. So that was a very interesting perspective. He's like, look, depending on the title, if the platform is not a direct competitor, I mean, again, different. They're looking at these platforms differently, and they're, again, probably not going to support Xbox on the way they would a Nintendo platform. One of the things that was really interesting to me was his conversation. He did say that if you're talking about Xbox games on PlayStation, he did say he thought it was a win for PlayStation owners as they didn't have access to those games before. Colin also mentioned, something of the fact of seeing Gears and Halo at the end of the year on PlayStation as well. But he talked about first party. This is kind of interesting because it made me think about Microsoft's pivot from their pivot to putting their first party games on multiple platforms. And he said, now it kind of go back to what I said about how they view Xbox. He said Yoshida discussed how this is an article for Gaming Bolt. They have some notes from some quotes here from the interview with Colin Moriarty on Sacred Symbols, but Yoshida discussed how focused PlayStation was ensuring it didn't lose ground to Xbox. Yoshida referred to Sony's console becoming the minority platform as his nightmare. And I remember him saying this. He says, I explained in one interview that it was always my nightmare when I was managing first party. I'm lucky it didn't happen. That if PlayStation became the minority platform, it would be impossible to maintain the first party development because the best creators would leave. They're not just creatives, they're business people as well. They want their games to reach the biggest audience as well. And then then Yoshida says, it's very natural if a platform is the minority. And if I was able to release a game on the minority platform only, it's unsustainable. That was the nightmare. Looking at the install base of Xbox hardware, it's kind of natural to understand what they are doing, and it's pretty straightforward. I mean, it's something that we've talked. I can't even count how many times we've talked about it on this show, but I feel like we've talked about it quite a bit. Where, people say hardware sales don't matter, right? And that's somehow the old way, and clearly they do matter because I forget what the number is. Falky, Xbox down negative 29%, down 18% in the life cycle compared to Xbox One, which wasn't a successful generation for them. And you have Yoshida saying, look, like if you can't sell your hardware, you're going to have a problem selling software. You're gonna have a problem selling those first party titles. And he says, look, it makes sense why Microsoft is pivoting in the direction that they're pivoting in, because they're having those issues. They are the minority platform. They're having issues moving those hardware units. Again, we're not saying this to say that Xbox is bad. Somebody, as you know, Logic, someone in the comments section will come up with some kind of weird number and say that we're brand defending. No, this is just a reality of what happens when you're not selling hardware and you're trying to sell first party titles. Hence the pivot. Falky, you're smiling again. Is it I told you so smile?
I mean, I've probably chewed everyone's ear off enough on this, but how many years, and not weeks or months, years have we been sitting here looking at it going, geez, their options are limited. Geez, these numbers don't look great. They're going to have to do something drastic. their options are limited. What are they going to? Well, this seems like the most logical thing to do if they want to stay in it. And everyone said, "Oh, sales don't matter. It's subscriptions, and the subscriptions aren't moving. Subscriptions don't matter. It's player counts that matter." Well, then their ARPU isn't shifting up. It's going backwards. If they're not generating revenue and they went and spent $80 billion to try and get more revenue in the door and it's costing them a bomb to do that, it's like, why are people surprised that this is the case, that they ended up doing this? But park that whole 4+ years worth of conversations we've been having around that point where, we get called everything under the sun and then some. Zhuhei steps out and says, well, yeah, it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? That if you're not selling your platform, you can't, your hardware to begin with, or your platform can't get sales on it. People can't access it. You're limited in what you can sell. So you're going to have to find somewhere else to sell it. Welcome to business 101. Like, that's a common sense thing, isn't it? You can't, where can you go and watch the NFL? Where can you go and watch the NBA? If it was on all free-to-air channels and all subscription pay TV channels and all subscription services that they have, if it was everywhere, the value of it would be nothing.
I believe Netflix is trying to bid on the NFL, by the way.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
I'm not happy about that, by the way, Doomsayer.
Neither am I. No way. That would suck.
Like,
that's the power of an exclusive deal, isn't it? If you can only access this thing in this location.
I just don't like the idea of the NFL Netflix.
I get that they want to do more of a worldwide thing, and I'll make this short because this is a gaming podcast, not a sports podcast. But
no, but that's a great point, though, Doomsayer. It's the same reason WWE did the deal with them. Yeah,
it's to get it worldwide, and how many?
Yeah.
What are you going to do? You're going to have 5 more NFL teams in Spain and Germany and England, and it's like I don't like the way the NFL's been for like the last 15 years since Godell did it. I think there's too much. It was always, a Sunday. That was football. And then you had Monday. Now it's almost every damn day of the week. It kind of, it's like baseball or basketball. Sorry, David.
So they spread it thin to try and get more engagement and spend a bundle of money doing it, disenfranchise all the diehards that would have supported it to the end of the earth, and then wonder why, when the deals come up, that A, the product's not worth diddly squat, B, they've got quality issues on selling it to the mass consumer. Like, can you see this? It's not just Xbox, it's repetitive in multiple different things in terms of when something's entertainment. So, and that's why I was using it as an example. All these issues, and then suddenly the floor just falls clean out of it. The money disappears because we end up in a contractional environment, and then what happens? They go, crap. We've got to figure out how we can make money out of this thing again. So they'll pull it all back to minimum viable product, or MPU, minimal production unit, and they will seek to put it in one location to drive the value of it back up. What Xbox hasn't been able to do is that they've spread themselves too thin, not done the retraction, and it's collapsed. Now they can't retract because they've got no player base in the middle of a generation. And they can't sell the hardware because no one wants to buy it. Everyone's already committed into the platform that they're going for. The digital libraries make it damn near impossible to change mid-generation now. So if people aren't adding a second console and adding a second platform in, and most people have already made that determination that it's either going to be PlayStation and Nintendo, or PlayStation and PC, or PlayStation and the rest of it, the only ones that are left over in Team Green are the diehards that have been there since day one. And they're really hurting now because they're having to deal with it. Now, that's not to say that it's not recoverable, but from a business perspective, they've got no choice. And again, it's the whole, when you take the value out of, like, the value of exclusivity and dilute it with all this other crap, because you haven't been able to sell the hardware to generate that player base engagement for revenue purposes, the whole thing becomes shaky as crap. And what is worse for Xbox in this whole thing? Nintendo is 99% their software and hardware. That's their business. They've got some other investments in some other lucrative stuff, but that is their business. PlayStation is 40% of Sony's entire business model is PlayStation. nearly half of that company's existence is in gaming and network services. So they sit at the top of the tree. Xbox is right down the bottom of the totem pole at Microsoft and are falling further and further behind, especially given what's happened in the last couple of weeks at Microsoft. If they're not careful, they'll get left completely behind. And if they have to become profitable and self-sustaining, what choice have they got? They've got to find some way of making money, but they've got to fix the quality problem to be able to maximize on that by selling stuff on PlayStation and Nintendo. Whereas what we're bringing this all the way back to the start, what Shuhei was alluding to was strategically, point by point, should we have this one on PC day one, or do we move it to PC 12 months later? Should we have this game on Nintendo? Do we share this game across these? Depending on the game, depending on where it's going, depending on what it's doing. Anything that's going in through China and China Hero Project has got to be on PC day one. Doesn't matter what it is. PlayStation's now taking over the publishing on that, where the previous games it didn't have to be published by PlayStation, but it had to be on the PlayStation platform. Now the deals are with phase 2 and 3. You can build the game, we'll support you, but you have to use us as your publisher. And that's why, and that's across all the different hero projects they've got. There were 2 teams in Spain that didn't want to do that, and they pulled out of the program. They've had 1 in India pull out, and they've had 2 in China pull out because they didn't want to publish through PlayStation. They wanted to they had other publishing deals that they had to agree to. So they've lost their funding points from PlayStation in that respect, but that doesn't mean that they can't engage with PlayStation to do those deliveries. Lost Souls aside is going to do some numbers, particularly on PC in China. But that then brings focus onto, well, geez, PlayStation, what does that look like? Oh, the console is this. Holy crap, that console, that PS5 Pro is pretty amazing. Oh, look at this. Phantom Blade Zero's coming. Black Myth Wukong's still there. And look at the quality output. Wow, that's the draw. And that's, again, what Shuhei was talking about. Specific focus in certain areas to be able to broaden. The underlying point is average revenue per user, to broaden that player base, to continue that higher revenue inputs.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Falky. So those were some of the key highlights, I think, takeaways for me with the Shuhei interview. Anyone else have any additional thoughts on Shuhei's interview? Or interviews, I should say, because he's done more than one.
I'm good.
All right. I do want to move on to the other interview that I thought was really interesting. Our good buddy Matt Piscatella. Logic, did you watch the whole interview with Matt and Kind of Funny? I didn't get through the whole thing.
Yeah, I'm on my second watch through.
All right. Do you mind running with some of the things that Matt talked about?
Sure. So most of these notes are just from the first 30 minutes because I just watched the first time around, and then I'm going back through in a second one, taking notes. Some of these I will try and be specific because some of these are things that Matt said, and some of these are my own assessment of things that Matt said. So this first one is an assessment, and one of the things that Matt talked about is how we've reached a ceiling of gamers. So this is a hypothesis that I've offered on this channel multiple times before, and probably in other places. This notion that just because you put a game in front of someone, they're going to suddenly be incentivized to pick up a controller and become a gamer, in my mind, is just not accurate. And so you can look at a microcosm of gaming in VR. Like, VR has a ceiling, because not only are there people who are going to have limited interest in getting into VR, but you have some human beings, and this requires some knowledge of, I mean, it helps. I think I extrapolate a lot of my knowledge off of how human beings perform in vehicles, because that's a lot of the engineering that I do. But you have some human beings who, for instance, just don't have the cognitive and perceptive capacity to, say, fly an aircraft, right? Or manage an ocean vessel at sea, because their minds cannot conceive of relative motion in the way that's necessary when you have a multi-thousand-ton vehicle on the water being influenced by not only its own propulsion but ocean forces, and without like a lot of electronics to help tell them what direction a ship is actually moving or something that's going to hit, they would wind up hitting the ship or going aground, like when you're in the Panama Canal and the direction you were pointing the ship in is not actually the direction the ship is going because there's drift and there's sea forces, etc. So you have people who can't do that computational processing in a very rapid manner. And so it's a similar effect with games. In addition to that, you have VR with people who don't have the spatial perception to do it. So then explode that out to the macro of gaming. Same thing. You have a group of people who aren't going to be interested or don't have the spatial perception, cognitive capability, digital dexterity, etc., to pick up a controller and do all of the things that are necessary in gaming. This amongst the human race just gives you a maximum capacity of people who are ever going to game. I kind of jokingly refer to it as the G gene or the X gene, right? Mutants, right? There's only so many people who have the mutant gene, and generally in similar fashion to mutant mythology, they typically tend to spawn in their preteen years, and then they flip the switch and become a gamer, right? And then they stick with it generally. So one of the comments I made about the comments Matt Piscatella said, it's these people who talk about yes, but they're only selling the consoles to the same people, right? In this constant dialogue about Xbox versus PlayStation. It's not just about selling consoles, right? We've hit a ceiling, and I'll get into a little bit more. At least in the let's again talk in macro terms of just like in the United States, or just in kind of the Western world, or just like PC console gaming in general. But it's not just selling consoles to the same people. The ceiling of the total number of people who are interested in gaming has pretty much been hit. Matt talked about how the video gaming space, and he's talking mostly about consoles and PCs. Everybody who would want access to those things has that access. Technology has evolved. The availability of games has evolved. The products are available for people to go get if they're interested in them. And so when you talk about this whole thing about, there's one narrative out there that says, the industry isn't growing, and that's actually not true. But what is true is that the console PC gaming market is a mature market, and he mentions that. And so it's not going to be subject to this explosive growth that we saw, in the earlier 2000s. And so the reality is it's not just about selling consoles to the same people. Is that the available gamers in total has kind of peaked in countries that and this is one of his comments, in countries where you have had a gaming industry for a very long time. The percentage of the population, there's a little bit of mix of what he said and what I'm saying. The percentage of the population that is interested in gaming is already there. There aren't people standing around saying, I wonder if I should be a gamer. So barring a revolution like Twitch, when you had the advent of live streaming, that exposed a lot more people to games. And so you did have more people get in a pool. Barring a technology revolution that presents an alternative mode of gaming. Like I said, VR, right, kind of led to a growth of gamers. The next evolution in that direction is probably something like a holodeck, which Google has kind of an example of and other people are working on. But until you present something like that, obviously we had an explosion in mobile gaming. And although I'm not really including that in this conversation, that's why you had a big explosion, because people were presented an alternative means to gaming. And Piscatella says the same thing. It's like, unless you have like a technological evolution that presents a different manner in which for people to game, you're probably just not going to get that many more people. And so, Brad, I'm going to need you to take over. I got to go take a look at something. Sorry, I'll be right back to continue this. I have a number of things that I definitely want to get into, but I got to have you guys pinch it for a second.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, so so he did talk about like that the console space. It's a mature market now, right? And I equate it. We talked about like the mobile market, right? The mobile market being a mature market, and I think with other mature markets, I mean, you guys have heard me say this. We don't have these conversations with Apple or with Samsung, and I mean within the context of the mobile space. We don't do that. We don't have this context. We don't have this conversation around. I don't know, Falky. What are some other mature consumer markets? There's a lot of them.
Well,
yeah.
So there's it probably. I'll just add these couple of things. And Logic can correct me if this isn't that, because I have only seen excerpts. I haven't seen the whole interview with Matt, but Matt Piscatella looks after the Circana, which looks at US
Yeah.
markets only, doesn't look
Yeah.
after all markets. So there's some stuff in the chat that's the boundary that you need to, or the context that you need to understand where his comments are coming from. It's primarily grounded in US market. It's not primarily grounded in global market. So yes, there were some comments in there. Emerging markets like India and China and some of the Asian countries, fair enough. However, those don't have much visibility in sales data because they don't do tracking. And this we don't know what the secondhand market looks like because no one tracks the secondhand sales for the gaming consoles and that sort of stuff. So there might be a hard limit, or we've reached the saturation point, or the we've reached the ceiling for the new console gaming market and PC markets for new sales and whatnot. But there's always that subset of the secondary markets and tertiary markets that we just don't have that visibility on, which adds to the big pie of gaming as an entertainment medium. And there's multiple different parts that go to that. Really good games that sell well day one may not have a long tail in the second and tertiary markets. Consoles being changed hands. I mean, you see so many people are selling them privately to other people that get them involved. New people come online. That's a new active user without the console sale, but you still need the console to do that. So there's an awful lot of different points and parts there. The maturity of the market is on both sides. So there's maturity in the console and PC market on the creation or the infrastructure hardware manufacturing side. I mean, technology always advances, but the way that the technology advances is always is very mature and stable at the moment for console manufacturers and the hardware manufacturers and all the rest of it. But it's also mature on the consumer side. The consumers have their habits, the consumers have their profiles, the consumers know what they like, what they dislike. There's not an awful lot of variety coming through, as that Logic was saying. There's not a huge amount of upheaval or churn or new disruptors coming into that market. So there's stability there. And as we've discussed it previously, how do you get an area to grow is you either got to find new ways of bringing people in, or you've got to find new ways of reaching the same audience that's there. And I don't think that there's a argument either way to say that it's stagnant. I think the growth is slow. I don't think there's much growth left in it at all in certain markets. But that's not to say that it's falling, and that the levels that people, as Logic said, there's a cap. We've sort of hit the cap on the amount of people who are interested in gaming. If you have that as a percentage of population, there'll always be some level of growth because the population keeps growing. So will we get a boom if we have another output or outcome that forces people to, not be able to go outside and play sports? Well, possibly, but those sort of things we hope never happen again, and we want them to be few and far between. So, but yeah, I mean, the maturity of that market is saying those things. There's plenty of markets that are like extreme, say, mature to the point where there's, the telephones, smartphone markets. There's very few new players coming into that, and it's a very stable technology. Food production, again, very stable. No new players coming through. Very mature market on both sides. Digital entertainment, I mean, we're starting to see some contractions and consolidations in streaming services, but digital entertainment is, again, another market that's very mature. Motor vehicles, education, like there's stuff that's just been around for a long time where the disruptors are very few and far between, and it's more of a leverage of current, the disruptors are more of a leverage of current process and market trends than it is of upheaval and setting a new one.
Yeah, that's a great point, Falky. Thank you. Falky, I know you mentioned you got to go.
Yeah, I do. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. I certainly appreciate you joining us. Thank you.
That's all right. Sorry for boring the absolute pants off everyone, and for talking so much. But
No.
I will. I'll have the earbuds in. I'm going to go and do a few things. We'll have the earbuds in. I'm really keen to hear what Logic's got to say about this Piscatella one. I haven't watched the full interview yet, so I'm going to get it tainted by logic first before I go and listen to it. But thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it. Thanks to the chat. Have a good one.
Falky, thank you again, and I'm happy we made it to Saturday, Planet Earth.
Yes, it's a lovely day. Get out and enjoy it when it gets to you.
Yeah, thank you, Falky.
David, have a good one.
You
See
too.
ya.
Thanks, guys.
So I apologize. I had to step away. I had somebody ringing my doorbell at 9:45 at night. I thought I was about to have a problem.
Was it like an F around and find out problem?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Oh,
That's right.
man.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't have. Well, I won't get into my whole home security setup. So at any rate, just going back to picking up where I left off. So his point was, so competition is absolutely brutal, right?
Yeah.
And I'm going to go into that a little bit later. He also mentioned that, really your growth now really is that, and he's kind of going back to 2021, 2022, 2020 through 22. It's really about getting the people who are already in the pool to pay more, right? Your growth is only partially going to come from new people getting into the pool. So you've actually got to get the people who are already in the pool to pay more. He also talked about the pandemic. Game logic at the door. I'm the one who knocks. Yeah. He also mentioned that, when you really think about the pandemic, and this is me kind of interpreting what he was saying, when you think about the pandemic was kind of like, is kind of like applying superheat within a crucible, right? You had conditions on the planet that force people inside. And so really your opportunity to get people into gaming was at its max potential that you're going to see. I often talk about how pushing Call of Duty to Game Pass was, okay, great, that's great if that works. But if that doesn't work, that's your max play. Like, there is nothing bigger. And we'll talk about that a little bit later too. The pandemic was kind of the same thing. That was your opportunity to push the most people into the pool, and where you would have the most where you would have the most growth, right? But then you would also kind of hit the ceiling. Like, there wouldn't be another big push, and that's kind of the reality of the pandemic. Brad, you mentioned a little bit earlier today, he made that comment, the rising tide raises all boats.
Yeah.
I think you and I had some kind of differences in interpretation. I went back and listened to it, and what he actually was talking about was, he was saying, in the time period where the industry at the macro level as an aggregate was growing, that meant there was always opportunity for growth for any player who was a subset of that industry, right? And that's the rising tide raises all boats. If the whole industry is growing, then everyone can grow. Here's the thing. Now that growth is no longer really happening at an explosive level organically, and this goes back to my cell phone model that you and I have talked about, right? Cell phones service model also reached maturity, at least let's say here in the United States. And so for those of us who were in the smartphone conversation, tracking that technology and carriers, which was a space that I was in the mid 2000 teens. And one of the things we used to always talk about is like, look, if Verizon says that they gained 2 million customers in a quarter, you just need to look at AT&T, T-Mobile, and at the time we still had Sprint, right? And the aggregate of customers that they lost probably equals about 2 million, right?
Mm-hmm.
We had reached this point where the other than population growth, as Falky said, the number of people who were going to get cell phones had peaked. And so the slough off, right, the churn in carrier subscriptions was always going to be pretty much a closed loop. And so now what Piscatella talks about is when you look at growth, the way competitors, at least in the console market, can achieve growth is you achieve it by taking the lunch of another competitor, right? Hence, all of you guys who want to argue in the face of facts and numbers, as Xbox consoles market share dwindles and they get further and further behind generation over generation, and you see PlayStation increasing its lead in terms of PlayStation 5 versus PlayStation 4, what does that indicate in a closed loop system? That indicates to you that people are defecting from Xbox. Ditto with Nintendo, who's obviously unquestionably selling more Switches now than it sold Wii U's, right? Now, there's some fudge in there because there's a combinatorial factor of the fact that a lot of people who own Xboxes and PlayStations also own Switches, right? But obviously there's some additional, there's there's an additional differential equation in there, right? Where those people who own Switches, probably now own something other than an Xbox, right? Where there's been a gradual drift towards maybe they now own a Switch and a PC, or maybe they own a Switch and play on mobile. That's kind of the end result of what's going on here from a math perspective. So now we're going to get into some really critical metrics that he dropped, but I just want to pause and see if you and Doom, Brap, had anything to add up to this point.
No, go ahead, Doom. I don't know if you have anything.
No, go ahead, Brap. I'm collecting my thoughts because when I when I sit there and I listen to Logic and David, it takes me a moment to calculate everything that they've sat there and said. So if you got something, please go right ahead.
Yeah, I know. Logic. I think that big takeaway for me was that it's no longer growth is about just taking market share from someone else now, right? That it's not growth the way it used to be, where like I mean you remember the days, right, where there was. I know you do because we've talked about it, but I mean 30 years ago was different. The market was vastly different. And I think if we, for us who've been gaming that long, we can look back at it. We can say, oh my gosh, remember like how that boom period and you could, it was tangible. You could smell it. You could taste it. You get the point. You literally couldn't taste it or smell it, but you could see it. I mean, it was there. And you saw it, like gaming became very mainstream in ways that it had never been mainstream. Like, you and I talked about this a lot, Logic, where gaming was very much you didn't brag about being a gamer back in the days at school. It's got like a, only the nerds gamed, and that was kind of, and now it's socially accepted. It's an entertainment medium that's bigger than Hollywood. I mean, think about that for a second. So that was a very interesting takeaway because I think it speaks to the console dynamic, at least in the market with Sony, Nintendo, and Xbox, where I think to your point, Logic, Sony's still growing. I mean, they're not experiencing that like organic growth that they had the PlayStation 2. I have my own theories about PlayStation 2 growth. I think that was kind of a lightning in the bottle moment because Sony was able to bundle a really good DVD player, Blu-ray player, and Blu-rays were very costly at that time, into a device that could not only play movies but also play your video games. And a lot of people, I know this is anecdotal, but I know people that didn't buy Blu-ray players. They were very expensive at the time. They went and got a PlayStation 2 instead. They were like, hey, you know what? I can play video games and I get a Blu-ray player relatively cheap.
Prep at the time I was working for GameStop, and there were actually people coming in saying, hey, do you guys have any PS3? We're like, oh yeah. And right, just like you sat there and said, it's the cheapest Blu-ray player. They were just coming in.
I said PS2, I meant PS3, yeah.
So yeah, I know exactly what we were talking about.
And that's an example of that technological revolution or inflection point that I talked about, right? Like, and I'm sure, I'm reckoning that the way that went is some people came in and bought them, and they bought them for the purposes of buying a Blu-ray. And again, the point I'm connecting it to is a technological implementation that causes organic growth in the market, right? People who previously weren't in, but because of a technological differential, decided that they would get in. And I'm sure that lots of people bought them for that purpose, but then we're like, oh, well, hey, I might as well play a video game on this thing too. And maybe became gamers after that. I think that's a more effective. I believe that had a greater impact, right, on pulling people into the pool than the every screen is an Xbox, right, effort. Because you have a lot of people who don't own a gaming device who are like being subjected to that advertising effort. Yeah, go ahead, Brad. Sorry.
And Logic, I meant I said Blu-ray player. I meant DVD player for the PS2 because that was. I mean,
we had both generations, right?
Yeah, both
people who bought PS2s for DVD and then bought PS3s for Blu-ray.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of it was a big thing. I mean, and so that was my real takeaway, that like, hey, because people often conflate this idea you can only grow by having organic growth. And if that was true, Logic, and Doomsday, I think you guys would agree that these other mature markets wouldn't exist today. But companies could still find success from a revenue standpoint in a mature market. Because to your point, Logic, like you said, Piscatella said, hey, they're figuring out how to charge more people money. I don't know. I don't remember if he gave examples, Logic, but you look at the increase of the price of AAA content now. It's gone up $10, right? That's one way. Now there's other ways to monetize you: downloadable content, subscription services,
Skins, stuff
skins. Yeah, I mean headsets, right? The PlayStation remotes, the remote play. That all these different like little knickknacks, devices, things are very Apple-esque.
Well, the comment you mentioned, right, goes back to what you and I always say, right? Like, why is play who is this for? Right? Well, dum, right? It's for the people that I'm trying to. I mean, and look, I'm not saying that it's like a great positive, but like it's for the people that I've gotten engaged in the ecosystem, and I'm trying to get more revenue out of that individual gamer. Is the PlayStation Portal meant to bring new gamers in and cause organic growth? No, it's meant to take the people who are already in the pool and already in your ecosystem to buy more stuff. Just the same way that Apple does, right? HomePods don't really necessarily make a whole ton of sense, right? The Apple TV for years was, I mean, Apple called it itself, this is a hobby for us. Fast forward to now, I'm going to put a subscription service, an over-the-top service on top of the thing and make it 4K. And now, quite literally, Apple TV is one of the best streaming devices you can buy, right? That goes bonga out of the hobbyist Apple product, right? So, yeah. And I mean, I used to have, I've had every other streaming device. I've loved some, less loved some others. But at the end of the day, right? For decades, I didn't buy an Apple TV, but I have one now, and it's probably one of the best streaming devices that I've ever used. So
I'll agree totally with you. I've had Roku, the Amazon, they all took in the shit. I'm going on, I think it's 6 years or 5 years on this, and it works like it's been brand new. So
Doomsday, are you saying I should upgrade from my Roku device that streams 4K to an Apple device? Apple TV device?
Listen, I am all Apple.
So you're in the Apple ecosystem like Logic then?
Yeah, yes.
So I'm in the minority here. Okay.
Yeah. Brap, I'm not giving you any advice. You do what you want to do because it's your money and that's what I tell everybody that, but it's a very good device. That's all I'm going to say.
So Brap, anything else before I go on to the next part of his interview?
No, that was it, Logic. I mean, that was just kind of like my big. I wasn't surprised by what he said because we've talked about on this show, but it was more like yeah, like guys, like pay attention. Like this is, I really hope people watch this video because there's a lot of insight here, and it really kind of corroborates a lot of the things that we've talked about on this show too. But go ahead, Logic.
Yes, I mean, that's a big thing. I kind of agonize a little bit over whether I'd actually talk about some of the numbers that he mentioned because I'm not incentivizing people to not go watch the interview. You need to go watch the interview because I'm not presenting all of the insights here. But just for the next segment of it, so a specific thing that he mentions is and this again dovetails with things I've often said. We have a lot of people who run around saying, "Oh, well, the only thing you should be doing now is," who have been in this chat, say the only thing you should be doing now is live service. It's the only thing that makes sense. It's the only thing that makes money. The gotcha there is you have these big monoliths, these 800-pound gorillas who are in that space, and people are entrenched right in those games. And so, sure, there's a lightning in a bottle opportunity, right, to go there and become an A-list actor, but your competition is everybody else who's literally eating the lunch of anybody small who comes through. So he mentions out of the top 10 service games, and he mentions a few: GTA Online, Roblox, Call of Duty, Marvel Rivals at this point. And he mentioned specifically at this point, meaning it's a new entry into the top 10 and isn't, as I often say, there's nothing that says it's going to stay there. And those are, and he's specifically talking about your top 10 service games on Xbox and PlayStation. Here are the big numbers. 7 out of 10 players will, like, every time they turn on their console, will play one of those games in the top 10. And across the entirety of the user base on those consoles, 40% of all total player playtime on each platform goes to an aggregate of those top 10 games. So today, the competitive facet is you really only have 50 to 60% of total player time, right? And this is why I'm talking about this is now an attention-based economy, right? You only have 50 to 60% of that total player time that is really your addressable market. It's really your resource and the thing that you're going after to achieve market capture. He then goes on to say 30% of gamers, I'm going to say it a third time, 30% of gamers, and again, talking about console, PC-centric gamers in the US, Western market, whatever, 30% of them will not buy a game in 2025. That is a third, right? We're guilty of it on this channel too, right? We all run around talking about the total numbers of players who are on each blah, blah, blah platform, whatever. A third of them are not going to buy a game in 2025. 18% will buy one new game every 6 months. And the way Piscatella describes them, these are your players, and I've often talked about this on this channel again too, that there's this college bro demographic, right? That basically buys Madden and Call of Duty every year. And that's it, right? EA Football Club and Call of Duty, and that's it, right? Or maybe they buy a Forza and Call of, right? I mean, but that is the 18%. Get ready to continue to be shocked. 12% of us, all of you guys out here in the chat, people who run this podcast circuit, pay attention to all this stuff, 12% of the market buys one game a month. So this, again, I go back, I sometimes give you guys a ration of crap, right? The people who like watch like the showcases at this little tiny level of minutia and keep tracking sheets and run around claiming, I'm going to play this game in this month and this game in this month, 12% of the market. 4% are in the demographic that buys more than one game a month.
Hey, Logic, can I
Yeah.
cut you off for a minute? Wrap. I appreciate you guys having me on. I actually got to roll, so you guys have a great night. I'll be listening to you tomorrow and that stuff. So, Wrap, appreciate this. Thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks for coming on, dude. I appreciate it, man.
Definitely. Good Logic. Have a good night too.
See you, dude. And so he goes on to mention that the publishers getting hit the most are the ones who are in this pool who are targeting that 16%. So again, the people, and even Ubisoft a few years ago talked about launching its Ubisoft Plus subscription service, and they mentioned that, hey, the demographic we're going after are the people we identify as the core gamer are the people who buy 10 or more video games a year. Clearly, right, based on these numbers, that's an incredibly small percentage. Now, granted, I think that those of us who are in that pool are those of us who spend a disproportionate amount of money on the market. And so, again, while we may be a small percentage, I believe in total revenue, we're a wedge that kind of makes the market move or not. That's, I mean, you can interpret that however you want to. When we talk about live service games, a person who was quite frankly arguing with Brad and I in the comments last week mentioned, Xbox is better or in a better position because it already has live service games, and that's the direction of the market. And there's something there to scratch at. I won't totally get into it, but I also think, again, I've even seen a comment in this chat that has asserted that PlayStation has no live service games, and that is also not true. And so of your live service games, and I only put the ones down here that I personally felt really mattered. Like there's some that are below a level of threshold that I'm like that, like they're not revenue impactful. But Xbox does now have Call of Duty, Overwatch, Sea of Thieves, Minecraft, World of Warcraft, and Elder Scrolls Online. And Elder Scrolls Online is even an outlier as far as I'm concerned. So I would paint the number that Xbox has of live service games that really help make the boat go at 5. PlayStation has Helldivers 2 and Destiny 2. And Destiny 2 is not a thing to be ignored, I don't think. And Helldivers 2 obviously has had its big thing this year. Greg Miller went on to ask him, hey, shouldn't all of this mean that indies can have a big play in this? And what Piscatella mentioned is that now today, right, because the market has grown, particularly through the pandemic years, to hit this ceiling. But at the end of the day, yes, maybe it's a ceiling, but the point is that the number is bigger than it's ever been before, right, of players that are in the market. And so when you have a good indie that breaks out, your potential for making a big hit and collecting a lot of revenue because of that is bigger than it has been in the past. So again, this is to address all the knuckleheads who run around saying, "Oh, but all indies are profitable. You know, this is the way to go." Blah blah blah. I've talked about this before. That when you look at the Steam numbers, who owns 70%, right, of the PC gaming market ish, that the vast majority of that, only like a very small percentage of games, like 2,000 games or so, even break 100K on Steam. And I talk about, like, in industry standard terms, your going rate for a brand new developer straight out of college is less than 100K. A few years ago, it was like 85K, and then it's probably a little north of there now. And that's for I wouldn't even say that's for a software developer in the tech industry. And I bracket that high low depending on whether or not they're working big tech out of Silicon Valley, West Coast type of rates, versus working on the East Coast, where there are kickers for people who have security clearances working in the government. So we'll just put it at 85K as a baseline. And then a game developer, I've talked to a lot of game developers, and I've talked to a lot of them who are hiring managers like I am in the tech space, and we've gone back and forth for me to kind of get a feel. They generally run, somewhere on the order of 15 to 20% behind, right, what the technology industry that I'm in gets. So again, if you don't break 100K, you're not even paying for one developer, right? That clearly means, unless you're a one-person development studio, the vast majority of games that land on Steam that are indies are not profitable. So going back to the point Piscatella said, right, again, now the potential is, if you do hit big as an indie, your potential earnings are greater than they've ever been before, but the risk is also now greater. So for every Balatro that you have, there are tens of thousands of indie games that don't even break 100K and aren't even profitable, is my point. And then I'll tie off here, Brett, before I go back to you, see if you have anything to say before I go on to what I think is the last section. And what he mentions also, this is largely driven because for indies, discoverability is becoming more difficult, right? It's not becoming less difficult to get discoverability and visibility. As an indie, it's becoming more. And granted, admittedly, I think Game Pass is a thing that helps there, right? If you are an indie and you are worried about being visible, Game Pass is a help. I often talk about how I just stopped going to Steam to discover indies because you have to dig through so much detritus. And actually, Game Pass does do a good job of kind of elevating those to your sight line so that you can actually pick some of them out. But then again, even if you bank on getting that increased discoverability, you still, as I always mention, as a studio, as a publisher, as well, more so as a studio, well, publishers too. I know we don't think of them necessarily as indies, but if Annapurna and Devolver Digital, old Annapurna, and Devolver Digital are putting out a game, I think it's still relatively seen, right, by the gaming community as an indie. But still, the point is even with a Game Pass deal, you still have to run the calculus of whether or not you're going to break the sound barrier and get enough ROI to put you in the black for revenue, right? Because yes, yea, verily, if you're on Game Pass, it's a negative incentive for some to buy your game. Brett, was there anything up to that point you wanted to kick in on?
Yeah, those numbers. Wow, I was surprised that the 30% number is the one that really surprised me. Logic that 30% of gamers won't buy a game this year. So I mean that is so that I think that further speaks to the challenges that developers have in selling content, especially when we have so much content readily available, right? And it made me also think about how difficult it is then to sell first party games, because now, correct me if I'm wrong here, Logic, but I would imagine if you have a console and the people in that console, 30% of those individuals on that particular console aren't buying a game for a year, and you release a game like a first party game, and that's the only that to me increases the difficulty of hitting whatever sales targets you have for that particular game, which makes it all the more impressive when you see first party games selling, 11 million, 12 million, 15 million, 20 million, in Nintendo's case with Mario Kart 8, what is it, like 60 million copies? I forget. I mean that. So it just makes that number even more impressive. but also speaks to the difficulty of selling content. I mean, and then you have 18% will purchase it. And then outside that 30%, you have that 18% that are like Matt Piscatella said, like the Madden people or the Madden players. They're going to, or Call of Duty players. They're going to buy that one game every 6 months and that's it. So there's a lot of dynamics, I think, and kind of made me chuckle a little bit when I was listening to Piscatella because, you know, as much as we talk about on this show, Logic, the pundits, they don't understand the dynamics of the market. I mean, I think I like to think that we have a better understanding of some of the dynamics that we talk about it on this show. But I didn't know that the market was that stratified amongst gamers where, I mean, 30% is a lot to not buy a game. We've always, go ahead.
Yeah, Falky mentions in the chat, reminder that this may not be unique to the US and maybe more than 30% in other regions. And Falky mentioned earlier in the chat that, you know, the vast majority of what Piscatella reports is based on the US. Of course, that still makes a big deal because between the US and China, like we are the vast majority of the revenue. But what I will say is I agree with Falky, and somebody asked me this on Twitter as well. Yes, it's indicative of the US, but I don't think that picture winds up looking better when you go outside the US. Like I agree with Falky. I suspect that the total number of people who aren't going to buy a game this year is greater than 30% in other regions. I expect that the 4% who buy more than one per month, probably less in other regions, given that, right, GDP in the US is, you know, we're one of the most affluent countries in the world. And we've benefited from that, as you can see from looking at the past historic record of foreign exchange rates and the strength of the U.S. dollar over the last few years. So, yeah, I don't think this. Yes, this is data that's endemic to the U.S., but I don't think the picture gets better fiscally for people running these calculations right as you get into other regions.
Yeah, I think Falky also brings up, although that is a high number, knowing that is equally important to make decisions around marketing sales expectations. Which I don't disagree. I mean, but I think, and I really hope people go back and listen, because I think Matt really gave a lot of inside baseball into the industry, how it works. He talked about managing P&L. He talked about that, but
he mentioned P&L and AOP, which I've mentioned on this channel before, like how both of those things work. And again, how, you know, lots of pundits, lots of YouTube channels just kind of skate by that and ignore it and make up this fan fiction. As if, you know, as if when I'm an executive and I have to commit to an AOP for a year, that doesn't matter, and therefore maybe makes me hesitate to cancel a game. And so this is another thing. He had a very great section on green lighting, and I'm like, look, if I gotta, you know, when you talk about delaying a game, right, that tension between the creatives and the business side, you talk about delaying a game, and I'm like, okay, but my division, my department, my, you know, whatever, I made a commitment to my AOP or my boss's AOP, and now me delaying that game right outside the quarter or outside of much less outside the fiscal year means we don't make AOP. That makes a difference. That typically means that AOP, typically what VPs then try to do is scramble to figure out where the hell that's coming from. Right. Sometimes driving other people to go after other revenue, or just trying to soften the blow, right, of things like that. So I'll just go ahead and go on, and I think these are my last few things. Like I said, he has a really good thing on green lighting, and I think the one thing I'll bring up is, you know, we often talk about green lighting and cancelizations, and we've talked about the PlayStation governance sequence, and again, you know, he reports on a thing that corroborates what, quite frankly, I've been telling people for a while. So the process of green lighting he refers to as basically a governance system that in some cases will have multiple gates. And so again, we see this at PlayStation, and we see this corroborated by, you know, the thing that the Spider-Man 2 team mentioned when they came up on stage at DICE. There are multiple review gates, and we saw this just happen with games that got canceled, right? That you don't just get greenlit, right, and then you get approval to release. You get greenlit, and then there are incremental milestone gate reviews for how is your game going. Oh, this is not meeting the mark. Yeah, shut it down, right? And so there are gates that you go through, and the thing to think about is that each time you come up to those gates, things are going to be different, right? So the game was greenlit with a calculated probability of success, and that probability could shift. It could shift because there have been domestic political changes. It could shift because foreign exchange rates move. It could shift because, in the case of Ukraine, war breaks out, and now you have a thing where people there aren't going to be buying games, but also maybe there was a risk that Stalker 2 was never going to come out. You could have a personnel change, right? You could lose a creative director, and now the confidence that game is going to stick the landing could shift, right? And you might say, no, I greenlight the game. It's got 8 gate reviews over the years that it's in development. At gate review 4, maybe I say, nope, let's take this off the table. He also corroborated a thing that we've also often talked about on this channel about Rich Session, and this gets a little on the political edge because it's not solely gaming pertaining, and most of the people who have come in here yelling and screaming and railing against it because because I don't know, because they're filling up a plastic tub with a hose in their backyard because that's the only way they can afford to take their kids to the swimming pool, whatever, right? But the point is that what we have been in the U.S. at least for a very long time is we've been borderline recession, but what we've really been in is a rich session. And what I mean by that is that there's a magical threshold, and the people who are above that threshold, particularly through the pandemic, have done okay, and in some cases have improved, and therefore are continuing to consume things out on the academic market, on the economy. People who are below that line are the people who sat, and I'm not saying this as a humble brag or as a means to make people feel worse, but there are people who are below a line who have had to knuckle down because egg prices are high and milk prices are high and energy prices are high. But there are people who have not been affected by that stuff, and haven't been affected by like look, if you're a knowledge worker who had the ability to go remote during the pandemic, rising fuel prices don't have it as much of an immediate impact to you because you're not driving your car, right? Brap was over here some of those pandemic years crying for how much he was having to spend to make his truck go. I drive a Subaru and I work entirely remotely, right? And I'm like, okay, whatever. Like, it doesn't impact me as much. So the point is he corroborated, but more specific to the gaming industry, what he talked about is like, look, the console demographic is getting older, but we are seeing those households improve economically in comparison to past history. And so those people are spending more on the console market and helping drive the business, making the business go. So like, I hate to say it, but all this Sturm and Drang about, game prices can't increase and, consoles can't be $700. Again, kind of as I've been trying to convey to people, yeah, there are people out there spending the money on those things. So, and he specifically mentioned when he talked about rising game prices, he's like, yeah, $70 games going up didn't cause anybody to blink an eye in aggregate. Again, there are people who are below a line that they did blink an eye, right? But there are people above it who didn't. They were like, $70 games, okay, man, whatever, let's go. And then he mentioned a point about subscriptions, and he said, look, subscriptions have kind of maxed out. They are not a mass market appealing thing. And he talked about these specific to Game Pass and specific to PlayStation as well. And what he said is, go back to the numbers that I talked about earlier. There are lots of those people, the 30% of people who aren't going to buy a game in 2025, they're not necessarily interested in a subscription that gives them hundreds of games right to play. They're playing Fortnite, right? Or playing some live service game that they don't need a subscription for. The 18% who are only going to buy, one new game every 6 months, again, they're going after Madden, EAFC, and maybe they're buying a subscription, but maybe they're on EA Play. Maybe. But you don't need to be on EA Play just for Madden. So he's saying that there's lots of market forces working against this notion of subscriptions, and what we have clearly seen is that it's not there. He then did talk specifically about Game Pass, the Xbox strategy, Call of Duty, and he said, look, Call of Duty was that's the scene of the guy in the casino in Las Vegas taking all of their chips and pushing them all in. And that's what they did. And he's like, we saw a blip, but we didn't see an explosive blip, as many YouTube channels and pundits claimed. he also mentioned specifically what we didn't see is we didn't see that create a knock on sales. So there were tons of people pushing opposing ideologies that said, hey, when they get Call of Duty and they put Call of Duty in Game Pass, you're going to see 50 million people flip to Game Pass overnight. That didn't happen. And it didn't have any, and they also said you would see defections from PlayStation to Xbox. Didn't happen. He said specifically that the move to put Call of Duty on Game Pass had no impact on PlayStation sales. So I'll loop that back to, if we're at a ceiling and a maximum number of players, right, that we really see, and you just pushed all your chips in and put the biggest thing that you could possibly put in Game Pass, and that didn't cause a wild inflection, and you have this impact of people are on the live service game that they're on. I think what you again have to start looking at is that there's kind of a maximum of people that you're going to get into that pool. So now we talk about, you just went out and spent $70 million to go acquire the thing that you thought was going to make a big inflection point in your subscription service, or just in people defecting to the box. And after you made that acquisition, you continued your backslide on hardware, right? And your subscription number isn't moving by leaps and bounds. So I'll tie this to a thing that he said, even though I don't necessarily think that he because he said these things at different phases in the interview. But what he did say is, like, the Xbox strategy has continued to evolve. And he mentioned, I don't think that they're done. I think we're going to continue to see more changes, right, as they try and adapt to the market. He said some very positive things. They're probably moving in directions that the market may go. They're probably shoring up. But the other thing he did say is, they're doing it partially because they have to, because the maximum number of people that they could sell to was 30 million ish, and you're only going to sell so many games to those people if that's your limited audience. Like, so putting your games on other platforms was not solely a, this is our ethos, and like all the altruism. I get it. Like, you got to do like the PR speak, but like this whole altruism of, I think games should be free and they should be on other platforms, and it doesn't benefit the game to, like, BS. Like, you had to do it because you could only sell it to a demographic of 30 million people. That's also 30 million people who are not buying games, because 30% of gamers aren't going to buy a new game, right? And so on and so on and so on. So you had to put them on other platforms because that's what you had to do. The question before of, if Xbox puts its game on PlayStation, does PlayStation lose its identity? To, like, they're another third-party publisher. No. I mean, and this notion that exclusives don't matter, I'm skipping out of the Piscatella interview at this point. This notion that exclusives don't matter, if the Xbox hardware and the PlayStation hardware, as many Xbox extremist fans will assert, is virtually the same, and as Jez Corden says, hardware is incidental, there is something, therefore, causing people to choose PlayStation over Xbox. If it's not a hardware differential, and the service differential of Game Pass is clearly still not causing people to choose Xbox over PlayStation, it must therefore, by all manner of logic, right, be something else. What could that something else be? I'm pretty sure it's got to be the software titles that are available only on PlayStation. So, I think that's most of everything that I want to talk through for Piscatella's interview and the additional things that I bolted onto it.
Yeah, I really hope, Logic, that people go back and listen to this interview. Go back. There's 2 interviews you should listen to this week, I think, if you are really interested in kind of getting some inside baseball into the gaming industry. That's the Shuhei interviews, and then the interview with Matt Piscatella. I mean, Matt's interview was, as much as we talked about the dynamics of the industry, the market, there was a lot that I took away from that interview. And we've had Matt on the show before too. And he's really, I thought he did a really good job at breaking down the numbers, and kind of like, for me, it's like, if I'm a publisher or developer, this is what I'm going up against, right? I'm going up against these, I have to contend with 30% of consumers aren't going to buy a game this year, which means that's my game. that they're probably not going to buy. 30% I have to discount. And then I'm competing with another subset of group of gamers who are only going to buy one game in 6 months. So it just speaks to the difficulty. And it made me think too, Logic, instead of just like tearing games down, I think we talked about this show, we should be celebrating games, especially like for me, like that was my takeaway too. Like we should be celebrating games even more because of the difficulty and the challenges that are presented to developers when they're creating content. This shit is not easy by any stretch of the imagination. You're just looking at these numbers alone. You know? Now I get it. I mean, are they games that come out not finished? Those are fair criticisms, you know. But I think this tearing down and this negativity towards games and game developers, I think we should rethink that a little bit, considering how difficult this is to create something that we, for our enjoyment, at the end of the day.
So that's a great segue. I know you probably are looking to wrap up pretty soon, but do I have time to go over the Obsidian topic?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. And yeah, last thing on that, I also want to make sure people don't get it twisted. This is not me by any means saying Xbox is a horrible business. Xbox should go out of business. They should sell off the gaming division. They should get out of gaming. Again, I'll go back and I've said many times, none of us are benefited by Xbox getting off of the competitive playing field, right? Any notion that PlayStation will not raise prices should a key competitor go away is foolishness, right? We've already seen that they will raise prices when a competitor is extremely weakened and they really don't have to worry about them. They can behave very bullish. They can behave just like NVIDIA behaves. And we see that evidenced by a $700 PlayStation 5 Pro because they don't care, right? We are very much at the tipping point where we're probably past the tipping point. I mean, I often talk about Nintendo being the honey badger of the gaming industry. You know, they drop a teaser trailer for the Nintendo Switch 2. Like they don't,
they do whatever they want.
Yeah, exactly. Like, whatever. You know, people hungry for the Switch 2. Here, I'll drop a 2-minute trailer. Whatever. Yeah. So you guys getting all thirsty, waiting for April.
Exactly.
You know,
and then we'll flash Metroid Prime 5.
Right. So I do want to talk a little bit about Obsidian. I think, and people are going to get mad. And as you should know by now, I don't care. There's been this effort to drag Obsidian Entertainment because Avowed is an 80 on Metacritic. And I think a lot of people, I constantly criticize people about not knowing their gaming history. And it's not a big deal for me if you don't know your gaming history. But if you're in that 4% to 16%, who's, again, running this YouTube circuit, right, of gaming podcasts and trying to be in the gaming conversation, then I personally have a feeling that you should be at least up to speed and have graduated right from gaming 101 and at least know the basics. So my contention is like a great studio is not just determined solely on the basis of its aggregate Metacritic scores. I talk about Obsidian has a cult following, and they have a cult following because they've earned it. They've been in business since 2003. They were formerly, it was made up mostly of employees who came out of Black Isle, which was a studio owned by Interplay. The games that they have to their pedigree are Star Wars, Knights of the Old Republic 2, Neverwinter Nights 2, Fallout New Vegas, Dungeon Siege 3, South Park The Stick of Truth, Pillars of Eternity. Pillars of Eternity was one of the first successful crowdfunded games. In 2012, Obsidian was almost bankrupt. They had previously done a lot of other people's IP or licensed IP. That was the inflection point where they shifted to doing their own. And they did it via this crowdfunding thing. It's very analogous to me. I often give Guerrilla tons of credit for shifting from being the Killzone studio, the people who were supposed to be the Halo killers, to no, we don't want to keep doing that. We want to do our own thing. We have this new creative idea and pulling that off because most studios can't. Greg Miller mentioned that, in fact, in his interview with Piscatella, he said, yeah, you know, we see these studios try to do this, or maybe, yeah, it may have been the, actually it wasn't. It was the IGN Podcast Unlocked interview with Kerry Patel and Fergus Uquard from Obsidian. And Obsidian does a lot of different types of games now. And Ryan McCaffrey mentioned, he's like, hey, we see other studios try to pull that off and they fail, right? So this was not a small thing for them to do. They also did Tyranny, Pillars of Eternity 2, Deadfire, The Outer Worlds, Grounded Pentiment, and they're going to be putting out The Outer Worlds 2 this year. That is not a repertoire that should be ignored or just, again, there's no causality for trying to drag Obsidian for 80, given all the things that they have done. if you go all the way back to Black Isle did the original Fallout and Fallout 2, Planescape Torment, Icewind Dale expansion packs, Icewind Dale 2, and Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance 2. When you look at that, the entirety of that pedigree, these guys have done some of the RPGs that have historically stood the test of time and have caused design inflection points in the industry in the way they go about building RPGs. That is the pedigree. I get it. Bethesda, the Skyrims, the Oblivions, they get a lot of Super Bowl type coverage, but a lot of these games are kind of the more ground level games, street level games that again have led to them having their cult following. I'll also tie into Interplay's background, because a lot of the leads from Black Isle were principal in starting up Interplay and then went on to become part of Obsidian. So if I link that also to some of the Interplay stuff, and I'm not linking it to all, I tactfully chose things that I felt were relevant. Interplay also published Baldur's Gate 2, Shadows of Amen, Descent 2, Descent 3, Earthworm Jim and Earthworm Jim 3D, Wolfenstein 3D, MDK and MDK 2, Descent Free Space, The Great War, and Fallout Tactics, Brotherhood of Steel, which I think the rumor is that we're getting a remake of Fallout Tactics, which is one of my favorite games ever. So look, I mean, my whole point of this is a lot of people who are trying to drag Obsidian, just in my personal opinion, just don't really have the credibility or the validity to really do that. You either don't know the history, you particularly have been nowhere near software development and don't really understand how games are put together, or kind of what it really means in the creative process when you go through the history that they've gone through of these inflection points where they've been known to do a certain thing and then they've shifted and pivoted to doing a different thing completely successfully. The definition of a great studio and the definition of a great game isn't constrained to the game coming out of Sucker Punch, Naughty Dog, Insomniac, Santa Monica, or Housemarque, right? That is what a lot of the conversation in the gaming community has been minimized to, and it really marginalizes all the other great work that's going on in games. We too often say, hey, if a game didn't come out from those studios, right, like it was a down year in gaming, right, or it wasn't a great year. And I think that's really just what the PlayStation 5 is as a generation. A lot of you guys mentioned in the chat that great things have been coming to PlayStation 5, even without games from some of those studios. And some of those studios obviously have put out games. We've gotten Ratchet and Clank, we've gotten God of War. We're getting a new Housemarque game. I shouldn't say we, right, but people who are players on that platform, they've gotten Spider-Man, obviously. So things have obviously come out this generation, but at the end of the day, like, how good this generation has been for you as an individual gamer isn't solely determined by the output of those studios. It's just kind of a foolish extrapolation, in my opinion. By the same token, right, I heard a few weeks ago somebody on a Xbox centric podcast say that Game Science was a nothing studio. Again, like the studio created a game that went on to capture Game of the Year awards, is considered by many the best thing that came out last year. Maybe not innovative, but was definitely definitely a masterclass kind of, right, in the state of the art and implementation, and really stuck the landing. So again, somebody who has no technical acumen, who hasn't put their hands on keyboard since they were in Mrs. Muldavy's high school computer science class, like I'm over it, right? These are the people who build the games that we play and build the games that we love. There's really zero reason to, like, I'm probably even a little guilty of saying, well, this studio is an S-tier studio, right? Or this studio, right? All of these guys are out here doing the work and doing the work that we love. The notion of trying to create content or being an engagement merchant by trying to drag these studios, just to me is BS. And again, puts you in that pool of people that I say don't actually love video games. So I think that's all I got, Brad.
No, it's it's great points, Logic, 'cause I did see that kind of with that narrative with Avowed, Obsidian, after the release of Avowed. But no, that's a great point. I mean, Avowed, I keep saying Avowed. Obsidian has a lot of rich history. I made a lot of great games. Again, I go back to the numbers Matt gave, what you just said too. This thing it's not easy to do, and I often think we're so quick to tear down these studios and kind of belittle the work that they do, because it's not easy by any stretch of the imagination, you know. And we talked about on this show, if you love video games, you shouldn't really be engaging, or can't imagine why you would want to engage in that kind of negativity towards something that you profess that you enjoy doing or love. So I've heard people say, I love gaming. So, you know, the engagement merchants they're gonna do what they're gonna do because they want to make money. So, but no, great points, Logic.
So Laura asked a question: is there any chance of WoW being changed from a multiplayer game to single player was due to Microsoft purchasing ZeniMax and Elder Scrolls Online not wanting to share player bases? I don't. I mean, maybe. I don't personally think so. If you listen, and I do, like we've talked about 2 interviews tonight, which we strongly recommend people go listen to. I also recommend that you go listen to the podcast Unlocked. And look, I may be the most vehement detractor to IGN and Ryan McCaffrey and the Xbox Defense Force that sits over there on that network. However, I will say the latest episode of Podcast Unlocked that did the interview with Kerry Patel and Fergus Urquhart, like I mentioned, from Obsidian, is a good podcast. Bypass the there are no bugs propaganda at the end of the podcast, and you should be okay. But Kerry mentions, right, and I think Fergus talked a little bit too about how, like, look, the game was going in a certain direction. We felt it wasn't shaping up and wasn't getting right again, talking about these green light review gates, right? And I think Kerry had an idea of where to take it, and that's the point where like they flipped it and they said, no, let's give it to Kerry and let her take it in this new direction. So maybe there was some corporate machinations associated with that, but I tend to believe it was just part of the creative process of, you know, seeing something that wasn't shaping up in your head the way you thought it would, and reprioritizing it and pivoting and rescoping, right, to take it in a different direction.
Yeah, I definitely need to watch that interview as well. So I mean, there's 3 interviews I think everyone should check out. The one on Podcast Unlocked. I forget with the person from you just mentioned their name, from Obsidian, and then also the Matt Piscatella interview on Kind of Funny, and also the Shuei Yoshida interviews as well. Definitely check those out. They're great stuff there. So, all right, Logic. Anything else before we wrap up?
No, nothing for me.
All right. Well, I want to give a big shout out to everyone in the live chat. Thank you so much for hanging out with us this evening. Really appreciate the support as always. Do me a favor, do the YouTube thing, hit the like button, subscribe, hit the bell notification so you're alerted when we go live. Also want to thank our guest this evening, David Faulkner, Falky from Down Under. Thank you, Falky, and Doomsayer for stopping by as well. So thank you again. And everyone, have a great weekend. Actually, let me give Logic, let me give you your outro, your proper outro. Let everyone know they can find you.
Yeah, you can catch me Sunday nights at 8 p.m. on the Enough to Keep Going Weekly Games podcast on the E2KG Network podcasting channel. I often come through the Damage Per Second podcast as well, and I'm doing a little bit of my own gig called Tag Talking About Games, which is on the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel on YouTube. There is no schedule for Tag. I do it not at random, but whenever I can fit it in my schedule. So I would say just keep an eye out on Blue Sky or on the YouTube channel itself. I do, when I know that I'm going to do one, I do tend to post like 3 days in advance on the YouTube front page that there'll be a show then.
Awesome. Thank you again, Logic, as always, as well. And again, thank you everyone in the live chat. Everyone, have a great weekend. Enjoy the downtime, play some video games, have fun doing so, because ultimately that's what it's all about. And we'll be back next weekend, or not next weekend, next Friday as well. So thank you again, and we'll catch you next time.